Chapter 660. Just from their appearance and attire, Andre could basically conclude that these two fellows were definitely not kind people. They might even be famous figures on the wanted list of some southern city-states. Their names might have long been remembered by the priests, paladins, and paladins of the church. Once they found any clues, they would immediately launch an encirclement and annihilation. Valencity was a city of crime to begin with. Many of its citizens had committed murder in their hometown and had no choice but to come to the Sardinia Islands to seek refuge from the pirates. Thus, it wasn't strange to run into a few notorious wanted criminals. However, Andre hadn't been in the South for long and had spent most of his time studying magic. He didn't have the time to understand the hundreds of notorious and dangerous criminals. Thus, even if he saw the most obvious physical features, he couldn't find any relevant information in his brain. Just as he was pondering what countermeasures he should take, the silent Ulick suddenly spoke. "Sir Mage, although I have no intention of disturbing your preparations, considering the terrifying things that might happen next, I think you should quickly finish asking the questions you want to ask. That way, I can immediately leave with my life intact. Isn't that right?" "Oh, I really couldn't tell that you were someone who knew how to seize the opportunity." Andre turned his head with some surprise and stared at the skinny man. He hadn't expected the other party to be so smart, to be able to grasp even a fleeting chance of survival. He also hadn't expected the other party to be so shameless as to betray even his own allies. As a mage with an intelligence of over 20, Andre knew very well what it meant for Ulick to allow him to ask questions at this time. It meant that he was willing to provide detailed information on the two mages in the sky in exchange for a safe retreat. "No, Sir Mage, this is a survival instinct. Anyone whose life is in danger will do everything they can to survive. Also, I must remind you that there isn't much time left." As he spoke, Ulick raised his head and glanced at the figures in the sky that were getting closer and closer, a pleased expression appearing on his face. Andre nodded with an unconcerned smile. "Of course, your reminder is very timely. Since time is of the essence, I'll make this short. First, who gave you the information that I live here? Second, what are the origins of those two in the sky? As long as you answer these two questions, you'll be able to leave unscathed and relay the news of the war to the guild leaders." The person who provided the information is the captain of the Devil, Casimir Kiz. Don't ask me where he got the information, because I don't know either. He is very mysterious and never shares his secrets with anyone. As for the two who were about to arrive, the older one was called Isidorger. He was wanted by the Church of Lucia, the goddess of dawn, due to his many forbidden soul experiments. It was said that he was very good at cursing spells. Many of Francis' enemies were killed by his curses. The other bald guy is called Angus. He is a mysterious person who suddenly appeared in Valencity 5 years ago. No one knows where he came from or what kind of spells he is proficient in. But one thing is certain. His fighting strength is definitely not inferior to Isidor's. They are both among the top 5 mages in the Sardinia Islands. Ulick spoke quickly and anxiously, and his eyes were fixed on the sky. He looked very nervous, as if he wanted to answer the question as soon as possible so that he could escape. It was clear that he was more afraid of his own allies than the enemies who were close at hand. Andre was keenly aware of this. The corner of his mouth rose slightly as he asked in a playful tone, "Tell me, why are you afraid of them?" "Afraid? I don't understand what you mean." A trace of panic flashed through Ulick's eyes as he hurriedly denied it. "No, you understand what I mean. Normally, a person should be happy to discover that their allies are rushing over, but you're in a hurry to leave. Can you tell me why? If you're not too stupid, then don't try to quibble. Otherwise, you'll only be wasting your time." Saying this, Andre raised the magic wand in his hand. A dazzling light appeared on the ruby at the top. Anyone who wasn't a fool would know that this light was dangerous and fatal. The fingers on Ulick's right hand twitched slightly. There were a few times when he wanted to pull out the dagger at his waist, but for some reason, he gave up at the last moment. He took a deep breath and explained with a bitter smile, "That's right, I'm afraid." Both Angus and Isidore have one thing in common, and that is that they never leave anyone alive. Even their allies are no exception. Furthermore, The corpses that they kill look especially horrifying, especially the facial muscles of the deceased. They're completely distorted by pain. Just looking at them will give you nightmares. Very good, you're very honest. I like honest people, even if they're forced to be honest. But honesty is honesty. All right, I've finished asking my questions. You can leave now. Remember, when you return, don't forget to tell the leaders of the guild that the war between us has begun. Saying this, Andre smiled and gestured for Ulick to leave, indicating that he could leave at any time. Ulick, who had long since lost his patience, turned and ran back to the guild headquarters without another word. As he ran, he kept looking back, afraid that someone would kill him behind his back. Watching the ace assassin disappear at the end of the street, Andre stretched his back and flexed his fingers. When the two enemies in the sky entered the range of the attack, he immediately completed an incantation and cast a spell as quickly as possible. He raised the index finger of his right hand and lightly tapped the air. In an instant, 5 missiles emitting a faint red light shot out from between his fingers, arcing through the air as they flew towards the white-haired old mage. Although it was only a rank 1 arcane spell, the magic missiles had an extremely unique property. They could not be dodged, and even if one tried to block them, they could only use a part of their body to block them. Shields, armor, and other defensive equipment would not be of any use. However, just as the missiles were about to hit their target, Isidore also completed a defensive spell in midair. A blue translucent eggshell tightly wrapped around him, and all the missiles caused ripples when they collided with it before disappearing without a trace. Absolutely brilliant. The timing of your casting of the defensive spell was perfect. You've really opened my eyes. Andre placed one hand on his chest and bowed, loudly praising. From the very beginning, he knew that the magic missiles would not cause any damage. That was just a test, to test the opponent's reaction speed and spellcasting habits. If possible, it would be best if he could trick the opponent into casting a higher-level defensive spell. Unfortunately, the enemy had seen through his trick and solved all his problems with a single defensive spell. There were no flaws at all. Chapter 661. In a duel between mages, what kind of enemy was the most difficult to deal with? It was not the kind of person who would bombard the opponent with evocation magic, nor would it be the kind of person who relied on his high level of spell casting to continuously cast high-level spells to seize the initiative. Instead, it was like the old mage in front of him, who used the most appropriate spell to defend against the opponent's attack. He was not in a hurry and dragged the battle into a rhythm that he was good at. Then, he would slowly exhaust the opponent's spell slots and finally seize the opportunity to seize the victory. In the face of such an enemy, all petty tricks would be useless. In addition, there were 2 opponents, so the one who would lose in the end would definitely be himself. Andre knew this better than anyone else. Of course, he was not unprepared. Now, the whole street was in a sea of fire. For him, the chosen of the fire elemental prince, Aesop Desir, this could be considered his home ground. The flames could heal his wounds and allow him to fly at a low altitude. In addition to the flame shield that he had just cast, the opponent would definitely not think that Andre was a descendant of the fire elementals and was completely immune to fire damage. They would also not think that he was the flaming duke who had disappeared for hundreds of years and had unparalleled control over fire. In a way, he had been using the flame shield from the beginning to release a completely wrong signal to mislead his opponent. Deception and misdirection were always the most classic part of tactics and would never go out of style. Andre was obviously proficient in this field. Interesting, I did not think that the mage who could cause such a big commotion would be a young man. Isidore gently stroked the human skull hanging in front of his chest and quickly descended from the sky like a respectable elder. However, his eyes were completely different from his expression. They were filled with cunning and viciousness. The other bald mage, Angus, also descended and stood behind Andre without a word. The 2 of them, one in front and one behind, formed a pincer attack. After standing still, the 3 mages did not move, nor did they speak. It was as if they were competing in patience. The only sound that could be heard was the crackling of the firewood. Secretly cursing the old fox, Andre deliberately pretended to be indifferent and asked, "You too? Don't tell me you intend to stand here until dawn? I'm sorry, but my time is very precious. I don't have the time to waste with you. If you still don't make a move, then forgive me for not keeping you company for a long time." Hee hee, youngsters will always be youngsters, always impatient. Don't worry, dear Junior, we are waiting for the mirror image spell and fire shield on your body to disappear. Once they disappear, I guarantee that you will immediately feel a different kind of enthusiasm. Isidore's skin was thick to a certain extent, and he did not mind revealing his purpose. It wasn't that he didn't want to attack, but the mirror image technique was too troublesome. The illusion created by the 7 spells was no different from a real person. Whether it was speaking or moving, it could be perfectly replicated. If he wanted to find the real body or destroy the illusion, he would need at least a rank 3 Arcane spell. Since he could use it to kill time, why waste his spell slots? Don't assume that all mages were proud and arrogant. Occasionally, there would be a few insidious and shameless fellows. As long as they could achieve their goals, they wouldn't mind using any means. Andre had originally thought that he was shameless enough as a transmigrator, but he didn't expect to meet his match today. The corner of his mouth couldn't help but twitch. However, passively taking a beating was not his style. Seeing that he couldn't break through the white-haired old man, he turned his head to provoke the tattooed bald mage. As an old man who is about to enter his coffin, I can understand that he's as timid as a mouse. But what are you waiting for? I originally thought that there would be an exciting duel of spells, but I didn't expect that there would be 2 good-for-nothings. Oof. Don't be in a hurry to clamor. You'll know who's the good-for-nothing in a while. Trying to provoke me with words? Unfortunately, you've chosen the wrong target. Angus sneered and curled his lips. The tattoos on his face looked abnormally sinister, and his eyes were full of disdain. Seeing that the 2 of them were scheming people who were completely unaffected by external factors, Andre could only sigh inwardly and quickly began to loudly chant an incantation. Although he was very clear that the other party wanted to first exhaust his spell slots, but with the current situation, if he continued to wait, the consequences would only be worse. Seeing that Andre had entered a state of concentration, Isidore's face showed a hint of joy, and he immediately shouted, "Old rules. Use the fastest speed to get rid of this ignorant brat. He has a lot of good stuff on him. Do what you're supposed to do. I don't need you to remind me. Remember, this time it's my turn to choose the spoils of war first." Angus replied coldly, and immediately took out a handful of silver-gray powder from his pocket and sprinkled it in the air. Under the guidance of the incantation, the powder quickly spread, and in the blink of an eye, completely enveloped the surroundings, forming a thick black fog. Anyone who was in the center of the fog would feel their heart palpitate, shortness of breath, and difficulty in breathing. Even their movements would be uncontrollably restricted. Hee hee, heavy fog spell. You really have a soft spot for this spell. Feeling the heavy pressure on his body, Isidore's lips curled into a sinister smile, and he also began to prepare his own spell. As a partner of many years, he was very clear about the uses of this level 4 spell. One of them was to block the enemy's line of sight, so that the enemy could not see his spell-casting movements clearly. This way, they would not be able to make any predictions. The other was to restrict the opponent's movement and spell-casting speed. It was like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Many enemies had been careless and suffered greatly from the heavy fog spell. It was obviously the first time that Andre had seen such a strange and sinister spell, and his expression immediately turned ugly. Although he began to feel severe discomfort under the influence of the fog, he still forced himself to complete the level 5 spell, mental retardation spell. Without any hesitation, he directly locked onto the bald mage, raised his hand, and pointed lightly. A white, transparent ball of light instantly shot out from his fingertip, and with a whoosh, it entered Angus's body. He did not even have time to react before his entire body trembled violently. Following that, his gaze quickly became unfocused, and the veins on the back of his hands and forehead bulged, as if he was fighting against an unknown force. Like most enchantment spells, the mental retardation spell was a spell that attacked the mind. It would be fine if he could withstand it, but if he could not, he would immediately become a vegetable. To a mage, there was probably no more unlucky and miserable ending in this world. Chapter 662. The heavy fog that contained magic energy blocked everyone's vision. The three of them could only vaguely make out each other's silhouettes. As for their facial expressions and subtle movements, they could only rely on their imagination. Because of this, Isidore did not notice his partner's abnormality at all. He was still focused on chanting the spell, intending to use the necromancy spell that he was best at to defeat his opponent. If the situation permitted, he also wanted to use Andre's body and soul to make a powerful magic item. The soul of a mage was a very precious material. Its strength was completely different from that of an ordinary person's soul. Even after death, a mage would be treated better. Even if they did not believe in any god before their death, as long as they were willing to give up their faith after death, there would immediately be gods who would accept them into their own kingdom. Although in the heavy fog, Andre could not see whether Angus was affected by the mental retardation spell, and there was no useful information in his retina. The current situation did not allow for a trace of hesitation. Taking advantage of the fact that Isidore had not completed the spell, he immediately activated the short-distance teleportation on his ring and instantly appeared behind the bald mage. He took out the rapier that he carried with him and fiercely stabbed at the back of the bald mage's heart. The sword was fast and fierce, and with the fog as cover, Andre believed that even if the enemy was not affected by the mental retardation spell, it would be difficult for him to dodge. When the sharp tip of the rapier was about to cut open Angus's robe, the tattoos on his head and neck suddenly burst out a dazzling red light. In the blink of an eye, the surface of Angus's body was covered with thick granite. Then there was a fierce collision between the rapier and the granite, bursting out a large number of sparks. Damn it! Magic tattoo! And it's triggered. Andre, whose wrist was numb, finally could not help but gnash his teeth and curse. He had already confirmed the existence of the magic tattoo through the arcane vision, but he never thought that this thing was the type that would be automatically triggered when certain conditions were met. After all, automatic triggering and automatic triggering were two completely different concepts. The former required the mage to activate it himself, so it was not too difficult to make. But the latter required conditions to be set in advance, such as when one's life was threatened, when one's injury exceeded a certain degree, and so on. Once the conditions were met, the tattoo would immediately be activated without any control at all. Of course, the trigger type had extremely strict requirements for the mage's level and his own skill level. Only a true master of magic tattoo could do it. Andre couldn't believe that he was so unlucky to have encountered the most troublesome trigger at such a crucial moment: stone skin. Fortunately, Angus seemed to be affected by the mental retardation spell and didn't react in time. He looked muddle-headed and didn't know what had just happened. As the saying goes, opportunity knocks, but once it will not come again. Andre, who discovered that he still had a chance, did not hesitate. He quickly sheathed the thin sword in his hand, and in a few short seconds, he completed the level 2 arcane spell, Melf's Acid Arrow. This time, he did not simply shoot it out. Instead, he used his other hand to pry open the bald mage's mouth and directly poured the strong acid into his esophagus. After the acid entered his stomach, even though he was still under the influence of the mental retardation spell, Angus could not help but let out a blood-curdling scream. He fell to the ground in pain, his two hands tearing at his tongue and throat crazily. At the same time, his body curled up into a ball and desperately hit his head on the ground. The acid that entered his body severely burned his internal organs, especially his stomach. It was as if a mass of magma had been stuffed into it. At this moment, it was probably severely perforated. If there were any ways to die in the world that made people shudder, then this was definitely one of them. Especially when this strong acid was created through magic, it was more corrosive than any known acid. In the blink of an eye, it tortured a mage to a state worse than death. In his current state, he couldn't even activate magic items or scrolls, let alone chant incantations or cast spells. The unimaginable pain completely destroyed Angus' will. He couldn't even concentrate for a second. As everyone knew, all the spellcasters on Oriar had to enter a state of concentration to cast spells and use those complicated scrolls and magic items. If they lost this point, a mage with a generally low physical fitness would not be much stronger than an ordinary person. As one of the enemies was no longer a threat, Andre immediately turned his attention to the other enemy. This was because just a second ago, the sound of Isidore's chanting suddenly stopped. This meant that he had completed his spell. According to the length of preparation time, this spell should be at least a level 5 spell. Andre didn't want to experience the feeling of being hit by a level 5 spell or above, especially a sinister necromancy spell. But it was a pity that the more you worried about something, the faster it would come. Just as he was about to activate his teleportation ability and escape from the effective casting range of the enemy, Isidore laughed wildly and shouted, "Ha ha ha ha! I have to say that you did well, young man. You were actually able to torment Angus so badly. But your good luck ends here. Now, have a good taste of my improved level 5 necromancy spell, Withering Spell." As soon as he finished speaking, his palms suddenly released a black light that accurately hit Andre's chest. In the blink of an eye, the skin and muscles in the area that was hit rapidly rotted and shrunk. In just a few seconds, it had spread throughout the entire body. Angus looked like a rotten corpse. If not for the fact that he could still move his eyes, he would be no different from a dead person. Pain, immense pain. Every inch of Andre's flesh and blood was protesting. Every inch of his nerves was sending out signals of danger. If he couldn't stop his body from festering, then he would die soon. What a terrifying necromancy spell. Just one attack had caused a powerful level 9 wizard to be on the verge of death. Andre even felt that this rotting and shriveling was actually due to the spell destroying his genetic sequence. Otherwise, how could a person's body collapse so quickly? According to the information in the books, the Withering Spell could only be used on plants. Who would have thought that after being improved, not only could it be used on living things, but it was also so powerful? Seeing Andre's near-death state, Isidore laughed and said complacently, "How is it? Do you feel my passion, dear Junior? Perhaps you are indeed a genius in magic duels, and can even defeat a difficult expert like Angus. But so what? Don't you want to die by my hands?" Chapter 663. As Angus, who had swallowed the strong acid, fell into a semi-conscious state, the heavy fog surrounding the alley gradually dispersed, revealing 7 bloody, rotting, and stinking bodies. 6 of them were illusions created by magic, and only one was Andre himself. Due to the extensive atrophy of his muscles, it was now very difficult for him to even lift his arms. Bones could even be seen on his calves, and large pieces of festering skin were falling down. He did not even need to put on makeup to act as a zombie, and only his beating heart remained healthy. It had to be said that Isidore had grasped the timing of his spell very accurately. At the moment of short-distance teleportation, the illusion created by the mirror spell appeared for about a second, and he used this second to lock on to his target. In a battle between mages, even the slightest flaw would be infinitely magnified, and the enemy would use it to launch the most fatal blow. Feeling his life force rapidly depleting, Andre spat out a mouthful of black blood, and with a hoarse voice he asked with a sneer, "You think I'm dead for sure? Or that you can kill me with this level of injury?" Surprisingly tenacious vitality. For a mage, your body seems to be too strong. But what can you do? Your fingers have already festered, and your throat is severely damaged. You can't complete complicated spell casting movements, and you can't chant spells normally. Oh, right. You also seem to have the ability to teleport short distances. Thank you for reminding me of this. After saying this, Isidore took out a light yellow parchment scroll from his waist pouch and directly activated the spell stored on it. A green ray shot out from his fingertips and instantly hit Andre. Immediately after, his body was suffused with an emerald light field. He was surprised to find that his ring of the displacement beast had lost its function. No matter how he tried to activate it, there was no way for him to jump through space, and the invisible energy field blocked all spells that could tear space apart. Level 4 Arcane Spell, Dimensional Anchor. Now that your teleportation ability has been sealed, tell me, other than death, what other choice do you have? Seeing that the spell had taken effect, Isidore asked with a cruel smile. Obviously, he was not in a hurry to kill his opponent, and he enjoyed the process of making his opponent fall into despair and pain. Of course, as an experienced old fox, he did not choose to approach rashly, but carefully maintained a safe distance. Dimensional Anchor? Glancing at the emerald green light emanating from his body, a look of understanding flashed across Andre's eyes. Although this spell wasn't recorded in his spell book, he had read about it in many books. As the name implied, dimensional anchors were anchors that prevented dimensional jumps. The principle of all teleportation spells was to drag the spellcaster's body into another world and then drag it back from the other world, thus achieving the purpose of crossing a long distance in an instant. The dimensional anchor just happened to be able to prevent any form of space jump. Generally speaking, if one wanted to kill a mage above the 9th level, the best way was to first use dimensional anchor to prevent the other party from using teleportation to escape. There was no doubt that Isidore was a sinister and cunning assassin. He knew how to bypass the magic barrier, and even more clearly how to kill a mage of the same level. Furthermore, he had much more experience in magic duels than Andre. In order to win, he did not hesitate to use his partner as bait. Some people said that magic duels were a contest of knowledge and experience, a contest of wits. There was no doubt that in tonight's battle, Andre was completely crushed by his opponent in terms of experience. He could only watch helplessly as Isidore unhurriedly chanted an incantation, using Dispel Magic to strip away all the protection on his body. Fortunately, he could still turn the situation around in other aspects. Just as the last protection spell on his body disappeared, a strange smile suddenly appeared on Andre's face. He quickly took out his fireball wand, resisting the pain on his body, and bowed slightly. Thank you. Thank you very much for teaching me a lesson tonight. I admit that I lost the first round due to my lack of experience. As a reward, I will let you see all of my strength without holding back. Huh, pretentious. Your body has already become like this, and you still want to turn the tables? Based on what? Based on that fireball wand in your hand? Naive. Isidore sneered sarcastically as he drank a bottle of fire protection potion. A mage was not a warrior. A single elemental damage was no threat to him at all. Even if the fireball spell's lethality was great, it only needed a targeted protection. Naive? No, you don't understand how terrifying it is when I go all out. As he spoke, Andre opened his waist pouch and threw the spell books, scroll boxes, magic potions, and other fragile items to one side. Although these things were enchanted with protective spells and were generally not so easy to destroy, he didn't want to try it all. He didn't want to see if ordinary fire protection could withstand the dark blue flame bestowed by Aesop Desir. Under Isidore's horrified gaze, Andre raised his fireball wand and aimed it at himself. The next second, asterisk boom, 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 asterisk accompanied by a deafening roar, countless fireballs exploded in a close range. The soaring flames melted the sand on the ground into translucent glass. Even from a distance of more than 10 meters, one could still feel the heat waves in the air. Unbelievable. Isidore could not believe, even in his dreams, that there would be someone in the world who would use fireball to bombard himself. Madman. A real madman. Just when he thought that his opponent's corpse was gone, a dark blue flame suddenly erupted from the center of the orange-red flames, and in the blink of an eye, the surrounding flames were devoured clean. Slowly, a naked young man walked out from the middle of the blue flames. It was Andre, who had completely elementalized. His originally tattered muscles healed at a speed visible to the naked eye, and in a few seconds, he was restored to a healthy state. With the ability to regenerate flames, he easily dispelled the damage caused by the withering spell. However, everything had a good side and a bad side. The destructive power of the continuous explosions of the fireball spell had burned all the clothes on his body. The wand in his hand, which had exhausted all the stored spells, could not escape the disaster. A cool breeze blew, and it immediately turned into a pile of ashes and drifted away with the wind. Only his ring, amulets, gloves, and a few other magical items were still intact. Chapter 664. The scorching flames burned fiercely in the air, providing Andre with an endless supply of energy every second. He could feel that the core wrapped around his heart was greedily absorbing the high temperature, and at the same time, providing a huge amount of energy to his body. As long as the surrounding flames were not extinguished, even if he suffered serious injuries, he would be able to recover in a very short period of time. This was the power that the fire elemental prince, Isoldezer, had bestowed upon his chosen. Just like the description of the flaming duke in the poem, as long as there was a little flame that was not extinguished, the flaming duke would never die, and he would be reborn in the raging fire. You are seeing such an obvious feature. Isidor's heart surged with an indescribable fear. Even his speech was affected, and he became incoherent. As a mage who symbolized wisdom and knowledge, it was impossible for him not to know the terrible legends about the Flaming Duke, especially the series of towns that had been destroyed, which constantly reminded people to maintain reverence for the great fire elemental prince, Isoldezer. Otherwise, destruction and death could come any time. And the one who carried out the destruction and death was the famous Flaming Duke. There was no good or evil. There was no right or wrong. The Flaming Duke destroyed everything that was not pleasing to his eyes according to his preferences. Even the churches of the gods were somewhat afraid of his terrifying power. Haha, you guessed right. After hundreds of years of immersion, I'm the 20th Flaming Duke who has just awakened. Now, let's continue the second round. You have just made me feel very painful. After saying that, Andre raised his left hand and gently waved it. A cluster of dark blue flames instantly turned into a cluster of arrows that flew straight ahead. After completely transforming into an elemental form, he could control the shape, movement, and even temperature of all the flames within dozens of meters around him. It was as if the flames were a part of his body, and he could make them obey his orders with just a thought. Even the purest fire elementals had to be promoted to giant or elemental elder to have the same ability. So far, Isolde was only a half-human, half-elemental. This showed how generous Isolde was to his spokesperson, and it was this generosity that forged the Flaming Duke's fierce reputation. Isidore didn't try to dodge the fire arrows that covered the sky. Instead, he closed his eyes and started chanting loudly. He believed that the power of the flame protection potion was enough to block these arrows that didn't seem very powerful. After all, the flame arrows were not magic, nor would they explode. In theory, the damage they could cause to a human body was limited. At most, it would only cause superficial burns. Compared to this, Isidore was more afraid of Andre, who could control flames. Facing an enemy who could never die as long as there was fire, he had reason to be afraid, especially when this enemy had a spell-casting ability that was not inferior to his own. So he wanted to cast a teleportation spell to escape back to his nest as soon as possible. No one was willing to fight a battle where there was no hope of victory, and no one was willing to lose their life for a job. That's right, in the eyes of this white-haired old mage, providing magical assistance to the pirates and helping them deal with the supernatural forces that might appear was just a job in exchange. If the opponent wasn't too strong, it didn't matter. But if the opponent was strong enough to threaten him, he would never risk his life. Isidore had just entered the state of concentration for less than 2 seconds when countless flame arrows fell from the sky and completely enveloped him. The protective force field formed by the flame protection potion didn't have any effect. In the blink of an eye, it was penetrated by the dark blue flames, followed by the sizzling sound of roasting meat. The pungent aroma could be smelled from 10 meters away. Ah, damn it, damn it, damn it. How is this possible? The severe pain forced Isidore to interrupt the chanting of the spell. He quickly patted the small flames on his body and cursed loudly while gnashing his teeth. But unfortunately, all his efforts were in vain. No matter how hard he patted, these fingernail-sized flames didn't seem to be extinguished at all. They were like maggots attached to the bones, constantly eroding the skin and muscles. In just a few seconds, they had caused great damage. Looking at his opponent's panicked expression, the corners of Andre's mouth rose slightly. He reminded with a smile, "If I were you, I wouldn't be so agitated. Those dark blue flames are nourished by anger. The angrier you are, the more vigorous they will burn. Haven't you heard of it? The fire elemental prince Isoldezer is also known as the Lord of Raging Flames. His flames are completely different from ordinary flames. They can't be blocked by ordinary elemental defenses. You've made a mistake, a fatal mistake caused by carelessness. Perhaps it's rude to say this, but I still have to inform you. With your current strength, you simply can't expel these beautiful little flames. And at most 20 hours, they will completely burn you from the inside out." Resisting the intense pain from the scalding flames burning his body, Isidore could no longer maintain his gentle and refined facade. He glared with his sinister eyes and gasped for breath. After a full minute, he opened his mouth and said, "Deal. I request to immediately make a deal. Killing me won't bring you any benefits. On the contrary, if you let me go, I'm willing to pay a sufficient price in exchange for my own survival." Ha ha, this is truly a little unexpected. Should I be praising him? As expected of an experienced senior. When he noticed that the situation was bad, he immediately made the choice that was most beneficial to him. Andre was truly amused by the shamelessness of this old mage in front of him. He couldn't help but laugh. After all, not long ago, the other party had attempted to use the withering spell to get rid of him. But now, he was pretending to be the victim and even attempted to resolve the problem through negotiation and trade. Young man, don't be in such a hurry to refuse. The things I'm using to trade are definitely useful to you, especially the information regarding the secret mage tower on this island. You definitely won't be able to obtain it from anywhere else. Isidore ignored the mocking mockery and instead calmly emphasized the resources in his hands. Although he was currently at an absolute disadvantage, he was still far from being at the end of his rope. At the very least, he believed that he still had enough bargaining chips. Thus, he appeared very calm. "Oh, that seems very interesting. Tell me about it." A strange expression flashed across Andre's face as he deliberately pretended to be very interested. He had long since heard about the secret mage tower hidden around Valen City. It was said that there were quite a few experts with decent strength inside, and Uhtred was one of them. Chapter 666. Phew. Isidore heaved a sigh of relief after receiving the promise. His guarded expression and tense nerves quickly relaxed. He knew that if a mage swore an oath in the name of an arcane mage, they would lose all their profession levels if they went against it. Normally, no mage would be willing to bear such a consequence, so he was temporarily out of danger. The next thing he had to deal with was the terrifying blue flames on his body. In fact, Isidore had a chance to escape, but he chose to stay and negotiate because he was not 100% sure that he could expel the little flames. As a sinister and cunning necromancer, he would never risk his life. Not in the past, not now, not in the future. Feeling the evil power of the skull in his hand, Andre quickly made a simple appraisal. After a while, detailed information appeared in his vision. Sorcerer's skull, made from the skull and soul of a young paladin girl. It is filled with the power of distortion and pain. Anyone who possesses it will increase the power and duration of necromancy spells by 10%. This effect does not stack with any other magical items. Note, this is an extremely evil magical item, so only people from the evil camp can use it. As expected, If one wanted to use this pale skull, they would have to completely abandon their humanity and become a monster that was completely dominated by desires and instincts like a demon. It was obvious that this item was not suitable for Andre. So, after a few glances, he threw it beside the spellbook. Then, a cold smile appeared on his face as he continued to speak to the old mage. Since the first condition of the deal is done, let's talk about the second condition. That is the compensation for the loss. Compensation for losses? Isidore's eyes widened, revealing a look of disbelief. He originally thought that after paying the price for his life and exchanging information for the other party to deal with the little flames on his body, it would be settled. But he never thought that there would be such a thing waiting for him. Shameless. Simply too shameless. Now he finally understood the feelings of those who had been forced by him. Yes, compensation for losses. It's like two countries going to war. The losing side not only has to pay their own ransom, but also compensate the other side for the losses they suffered in the war. Isn't this a matter of heaven and earth? I lost a precious fireball magic staff in the battle just now, plus all the clothes on my body. You better give me a satisfactory compensation otherwise. At this point, Andre suddenly paused with a meaningful expression on his face. Although I have sworn that I will not kill you with my own hands, this does not mean that I will not beat you half to death and imprison you. If you choose to resist during this period, then I will treat it as an act of hostility. I believe that you should know the consequences. After hearing this, Isidore's entire body trembled slightly. On one hand, it was because of the intense pain caused by the flames burning his muscles. On the other hand, it was because of his anger. There was no way he wouldn't be angry. Even a normal person would fly into a rage when faced with such blatant extortion, let alone a high and mighty mage. If it weren't for the situation, he would never have endured such humiliation. But unfortunately, as the saying goes, people under the eaves have no choice but to lower their heads compared to his belongings and magical equipment. His own life was more important. After thinking this through, Isidore hurriedly took a few deep breaths and forcefully suppressed his anger. He raised his head and asked with gritted teeth, "Say it. What else do you want? Say it all at once." It seems that you're a smart person. You know, I like smart people because they're always able to understand their own situation at the first moment and at the same time understand what others are trying to say. Since you have said this, I will not beat around the bush. It is very simple. Leave behind all the magical items, scrolls, potions, and so on. The only thing you can keep is your spellbook. Andre stated his demands without hesitation. In order to express his determination, he did not hesitate to put on a tough battle stance. As long as the other party dared to say no, he would immediately welcome a thunderous attack. Anger. Isidore only felt a surge of evil fire rising from the bottom of his heart. His eyes began to fill with blood in just a few seconds. After a while, his breathing became hurried as he roared. "There is a limit to my patience. Don't go too far." "Too far? No, I don't think it's too far at all." Andre stretched out a finger and lightly shook it in front of the other party. "Think carefully. How much is a fireball magic staff worth? It is probably more expensive than everything you have on you. If you take it to a big city to auction, it can easily sell for a sky-high price. I sincerely suggest that you reconsider. If you refuse, then I will have no choice but to take extreme measures." Perhaps the threat of force was effective, or perhaps he had finally thought it through. Money was just a mere worldly possession and was far less important than his own life. In any case, after struggling for a few minutes, Isidore's face was ashen as he slowly took off the ring on his finger, the amulet on his neck, the bag on his belt, the scroll box, and threw them one by one on the ground without a doubt. In front of wealth and his life, he chose the latter. He did not play any tricks, nor did he try to hide one or two magical items. This was because he knew that under the gaze of the secret vision, everything related to magic would emit various kinds of light. Even if he swallowed it, it would be useless. Seeing the last bottle of potion being thrown on the ground, Andre nodded with satisfaction. "Very good. Thank you for your cooperation. In return, I can first relieve your pain." Saying this, he raised his arm and snapped his fingers. In an instant, the blue flames attached to the old mage's skin seemed to have been summoned and quickly flew towards Andre. In the blink of an eye, they merged into his body and disappeared without a trace, as if they had never been there. As the flames disappeared, Isidore's body revealed a large number of burn marks. What made him feel strange was that these burns were not as serious as he had imagined, and were even forming scabs at a miraculous speed. After discovering this, he immediately raised his head and looked at the young man, standing in front of him with an astonished gaze. His eyes were filled with a strong desire. Obviously, this was not a normal flame. It contained countless things that would make mages go crazy, and it might even contain the secret to becoming an immortal. Chapter 667. Immortals, as the name suggested, meant eternal immortality. They would not fall ill, die of natural causes, and would not age. They were special individuals who stood at the top of all life in the universe. Among them, the gods with extraordinary powers were the most familiar to mortals. Although Isidore still could not understand whether these dark blue flames had the ability to turn mortals into immortals, he was certain that these flames contained the knowledge of the universe that Isidore, Prince of Fire Elements, had about them. Even if he could find out a little bit about them, it would be of great use to him. Although his life had been out of danger for less than a few seconds, the monster called greed in his heart began to stir again. Clap! Clap! Just as the old mage fell into some kind of obsession and was unable to extricate himself, he suddenly heard the sound of hands clapping. He immediately could not help but shiver, followed by Andre's teasing. Wake up! Stop daydreaming. The power of the flames of wrath isn't something you can pry into. Even the legendary mages from hundreds of years ago couldn't figure out what it actually contained. Without being bestowed by the Lord of Raging Flames, you'll immediately become its fuel as long as you come into contact with it. All right, back to the topic. I have helped you expel those flames. Can you give me the information about the other two people? As the user of the dark blue flames, Andre knew its power better than anyone else. He knew that it was far from being as simple as a flame. Rather than calling it a flame, it was more like an aggregation of some kind of high-energy particles. If Aesop Desir's entire body was composed of such high-energy particles, then he would be no different from a miniature version of a star. His destructive power was simply unimaginable. In this world without advanced natural science theories, particle accelerators, particle colliders, electron microscopes, and other high-tech instruments, it was simply wishful thinking to find out the results of research. Licking his dry lips, Isidore took a deep breath, withdrew his greedy gaze, and nodded gently. Of course, I will be very happy to fulfill my promise. But before that, you have to swear that after I give you the information, the situation just now will not happen again. There was a saying that went, once bitten by a snake, 10 years shy of the rains. After being tricked twice in such a short period of time, the old mage had begun to fear this seemingly young enemy from the bottom of his heart. It was because the enemy was stronger, younger, more shameless, and more vicious than he was. Furthermore, the fire elemental prince, Aesop Desir, was standing behind him. No matter how he looked at it, making an enemy out of such a person was like courting death. In fact, Isidore had already begun to regret how he had been so obsessed that he had actually taken the initiative to take on this dangerous mission. His only hope now was to escape unscathed. As for whether his poor partner was dead or alive, he did not care so much. Sure, I swear in the name of Alpha. As long as the information you provide is correct, I guarantee that you can leave at any time without any obstruction. From the old mage's eyes, Andre saw fear and respect. He understood what the mage was worried about, so he immediately gave a guarantee. Because he had already seen a black shadow with cat ears flashing in the darkness not far away. Isidore, who thought that he was completely out of danger, did not notice anything strange at all. He quickly picked up a quill and a piece of parchment from the ground, scribbled a few lines of words, and then gently placed them on the ground, carefully and slowly retreating. Andre did not pay attention to his movements. He bent down and picked up the parchment, only to see the information of two people written on it. One of them was Uhtred Alicorn, and the other was Gerald Jenkinson. The former had already died long ago, so there was no need to pay attention to him. However, the latter was not only the leader and the person in charge of the archipelago's mage organization, he was also the mage with the highest level, a 12th level mage specializing in defense. Uhtred's previous plan was to replace him and become the leader of the entire mage tower, but unfortunately, he never found the opportunity to make a move. After obtaining the information he wanted, Andre raised his head and stared at Isidore as if he was looking at a dead man. He did not speak, nor did he move, as if he was waiting for something. His actions frightened the old mage quite a bit, and he immediately asked in a stern voice, "What are you trying to do? I have already given you everything according to the agreement. If you don't want to lose all your mage level, you'd better fulfill your oath." Hee, don't worry, I won't do anything, I'll just watch. You have to understand that there are many times when killing someone, you don't have to do it yourself. After saying this, the corners of Andre's mouth rose slightly, revealing a smile that made people shudder. Isidore only felt all the hair on his body stand up. Just as he was about to turn around, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest. A sharp dagger had pierced through his heart from behind, and the tip of the dagger was stained with blood, reflecting an icy luster under the moonlight. A fatal blow. It was also a perfect blow. The old mage only felt that his life force was rapidly draining away. He subconsciously wanted to activate the defensive magic on his ring and drink a bottle of healing potion. But when his hands reached for his waist, he remembered that all his magic weapons were already lying on the ground in front of him. With a strong sense of regret and unwillingness, he slowly fell to the ground. Although his hands were still trying to complete complicated gestures, his throat could not chant a complete incantation. Soon, this mage who had once caused a lot of trouble for Andre closed his eyes and completely lost his last trace of life force, turning into an ice-cold corpse. Idiot! After going to the other world, use your brain properly. Why do you think Master made you take off all your magic items and equipment? It was to create an opportunity for me to kill you in one blow. Mia, who had walked out from the darkness, snatched the spellbook from Isidore's hands and sneered in ridicule. As an assassin personally trained by Uhtred, she was very clear that a mage who had the protection of a magic item and a mage who did not have it were two completely different concepts. The latter was just a body of flesh and blood, and would still bleed and die with a single slash. As long as one could act before they released their spells, anything was possible. On the other hand, the former could use magical items to make himself invulnerable to weapons, water, and fire in the blink of an eye. Even fatal injuries could be healed by drinking potions or magical items. Without the cooperation of others, assassinating them was tantamount to suicide. Chapter 668. After wiping the blood off her dagger on the corpse, Mia took light and graceful steps, crossing a distance of more than 10 meters and arriving in front of Andre. Without any hesitation, she knelt down on one knee and presented Isidore's spellbook with both hands. She then lowered her voice and reported, "Master, the plan is going very smoothly. I guarantee that in another hour, you will see the city enter a state of total chaos. The Rat Men and the Underground Guild will no longer have any possibility of compromise. They will kill each other until the last drop of blood is shed." Seeing that Isidore was already dead, Andre did not need to maintain his semi-elemental form. He slowly retracted the blue flames around his body and returned to his normal appearance. In particular, his torch-like hair seemed to have lost its luster and vitality in just a few seconds, turning into a translucent silver-white color that draped over his shoulders. The deep blue in his pupils had also disappeared, revealing the same color as his hair. Looking at his naked body, he began to miss the flame protection robe that he had lost in the sea. He then shook his head with a bitter smile and muttered to himself, "Damn it, looks like I have to get a mage robe that won't be burned by the flames as soon as possible. Otherwise, sooner or later, I will be treated as a pervert or an exhibitionist." Since the day humans had a sense of shame, clothes had become a necessity for daily life. Other than the basic ability to resist the cold, clothes also had many meanings. For example, it was a symbol of identity and social status, and it also symbolized a person's psychological defense. Therefore, anyone with normal intelligence would not be willing to appear naked in front of others, even if the other party was their own flesh and blood. However, Andre obviously did not have a choice now. Helplessly, he could only pick up the cloak on the ground and wrap it around his waist twice to ensure that certain parts of his body would not be directly exposed to the air. He then reached out to take Isidore's spell book and nodded lightly. Very good. This is exactly the result I wanted. As a reward, you can go to the pile of magical items on the ground and choose any one of them. Remember, nothing must happen to old Bernie's grandson. What I want to do is to cooperate with them and not fight to the death, understand? Understood. I will protect Patty in the dark and not let any harm come to him. Perhaps sensing Andre's awkwardness, Mia deliberately lowered her head and replied, even though she felt that this was purely superfluous. After all, she had already seen what she should have seen and what she shouldn't have seen. Now, no matter how hard she tried to hide it, she couldn't erase the memories in her mind. Andre did not notice the feline girl's thoughts. While stroking the complicated arcane patterns on a magic book and trying to crack the protection on the pages, he continued to ask, I remember that you have been following Uhtred for a long time. Have you ever heard of the name Gerald Jenkinson? Gerald Jenkinson? Mia raised her head in surprise, an unconcealable fear appearing on her face. With a slightly trembling voice, she replied, Of course, I have heard of this name before. He is an extremely frightening enemy. No matter what he does, he will always place himself in an absolutely safe position. Uhtred has been lurking for several decades and carried out countless schemes, but in the end, he was unable to gain the slightest bit of advantage. To be exact, he is simply not Gerald Jenkinson's opponent. From the beginning to the end, he was suppressed by the opponent and did not dare to make any moves. If you really intend to make a move against him, then I must remind you that this guy's character is extremely cautious. For several decades, he has never made a mistake. If you want to kill him, there is only one chance. Once you fail, he will definitely not give anyone a second chance. Oh, can you describe his appearance? Although Andre had long expected that a 12th level defensive mage would not be easy to deal with, after hearing the feline girl's evaluation, he still revealed an expression of disbelief. He had once read in a book that the mage's choice of magic specialization was directly related to their personality. Generally speaking, defensive mages were mostly cold and sensitive. Their brains were like sophisticated machines, able to see through the opponent's every move and plot. They belonged to the type that was the most difficult to deal with. Clearly, this mage named Gerald Jenkinson was one of the representatives. Not only did he protect himself like a tortoise, but he also eliminated all unstable factors in the bud. Even an ambitious old fox like Woodard could only obediently curl up in order to avoid being caught red-handed. Gerald is around 50 years old this year. He has short black hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His eyebrows are very thin, his cheekbones are protruding, and his chin is slightly sharper than a normal person's. He is a very thin and meticulous man. He is approximately 165 meters tall and wears a dark purple robe all year round. He usually stays in his room to conduct research and rarely appears in the public eye. In addition, this person's entire body is covered with defensive magic items. Once he discovers danger in his surroundings, he can immediately protect himself without any flaws. Even the blue flame you used just now would have a hard time injuring him. Perhaps because she had sensed Andre's strong curiosity, Mia gave a very detailed explanation. She sorted out all the memories she had of Gerald in her mind, using the form of language to repeatedly ponder over every word and sentence, so as to avoid any mistakes in her expression. A secluded traditional academic mage? Interesting. The corners of Andre's mouth rose slightly, his eyes revealing two rays of light. Academic mages referred to those fellows who spent all their time in the wizard tower conducting research. Since they were apprentices, it was very likely that they had never taken half a step out of the wizard tower. Although their level was very high, they didn't have much actual combat experience, so they were also called researchers. Mia clearly understood the meaning of academic mages. She immediately shook her head and denied, "No, Master, Gerald is not an academic mage. On the contrary, he is a battle mage through and through. He has participated in 3 battles with the Linton City fleet and killed at least 3 opponents above the 7th level. It is precisely because of this that he can suppress countless ambitious outsiders." Battle mage? And a defensive battle mage at that? Damn, this is not good news. Andre subconsciously glanced at Isidore's corpse and quickly frowned. He had already seen how difficult it was to deal with a battle mage today, and even suffered a big loss. Therefore, when he thought of facing an enemy who was 3 levels higher than him, and who was more experienced, he immediately felt a bit of a headache. Chapter 669. Noticing Andre's gloomy expression, Mia licked her lips and carefully suggested, "Master, you don't have to plot against Gerald Jenkinson, and you don't have to treat him as an enemy. Although he has provided a lot of magic assistance to the pirates, he still retains the unique way of thinking of mages and retains absolute autonomy." "You mean he can be roped in?" Andre asked with uncertainty. "That's right. As long as you can pay a sufficient price and guarantee the independence of the secret mage tower, he doesn't mind changing his service target. In fact, he doesn't care who rules this archipelago, nor does he care about the life and death of anyone." After pondering for a long time, Mia finally revealed the secret that had been hidden in her heart for many years. She had once been ordered to conduct a private probe on behalf of the Shadow Web. Although the 2 sides didn't reach any verbal agreement, she still remembered Gerald's tone and attitude at that time. Andre nodded thoughtfully and said to himself, "Maybe I can borrow Uhtred's identity and try to get in touch with this person." As the saying went, there were no eternal enemies in the world, only eternal interests. Since there was no essential conflict between the 2 sides, it was completely possible to resolve the differences through negotiation. After all, mages symbolized rationality and wisdom. Most of the time, they tended to use their brains to solve problems. Only those barbarians and orcs whose brains were full of muscles would think of fighting and killing all day long, thinking that they could conquer everything with their fists and violence. They didn't know that in the eyes of many ambitious people, they were just disposable tools that would be discarded after they were used. Just when Andre was lost in thought, the magic pet floating in a corner not far away suddenly transmitted the image it saw through the spiritual connection. A young and beautiful woman was lurking next to the stone wall at the corner of the alley, secretly observing the situation of the battlefield. She didn't seem to be afraid of the flames that were close at hand. Even when her fingers were burned, she didn't have the slightest reaction. A spy or a scout, or a fish that escaped from the owl squad. Staring at the woman's delicate face, Andre couldn't help but start to guess the identity of the other party, as well as her motive and purpose. His extraordinary brain would always uncontrollably analyze, ponder, and associate, providing a steady stream of reference data for his subjective consciousness. As a cat person, Mia's senses were very sharp, and she instantly sensed that something was wrong with the situation. She quietly changed her kneeling posture and arched her back, like a cat that was ready to pounce and kill at any time with a single command. "No, don't be nervous. Relax, my dear Mia. Don't disturb her. I like to see who she's working for." Just as the work-cat assassin was about to strike, Andre stopped her. At the same time, he used a gentle voice to soothe her overly excited heart. "Are you planning to use this bait to lure out the big fish behind her?" Mia wasn't an idiot. She instantly understood the intention of this, and her tense body slowly relaxed. Andre's eyes flashed with a chilling light, and the corner of his mouth curved into a beautiful arc. "Yes, no one can destroy my residence without being punished, and no one can escape unscathed after angering me. No matter who this woman is working for, she will definitely lead me to find the mastermind behind everything that happened tonight. Next, It should be time for happy revenge. Upon hearing this, a cruel smile appeared on Mia's cat face. She stood up and bowed slightly. As you wish, master. Before I leave, do you need me to help you deal with that captive over there? No need. He's still useful, so I can't leave him to you for the time being. Also, find some time to go home before dawn and arrange a new hiding place for Portia and the others. As the well-deserved leader of the shadow web in this area, Andre knew very well what dealing meant. It was an extremely cruel method of killing. A person would be dismembered and chopped into minced meat, and then silently thrown into the sea to feed the fishes. Although this method of killing was a little troublesome, it had the advantage of being clean. There wouldn't be any clues left behind that could be used to track down the culprit, and even the corpse wouldn't be found. Obviously, he didn't want to kill Angus for the time being. At least, he didn't want to use this method to get rid of a mage. Understood. I'll take care of everything. Mia nodded her head lightly. Then, she tiptoed and ran towards the small house that she used to hide in. When she passed by Isidore's belongings, she took the potion box. Compared to using magical items, she seemed to prefer drinking potions. Watching the work-hat girl disappear into the darkness, Andre didn't say a word. He picked up everything on the ground and then dragged the unconscious bald mage out of the alley that was surrounded by a sea of fire. Throughout the entire process, he didn't relax his surveillance on the woman and only stopped when he was sure that she couldn't see him. Hee, let me see who your master is. He actually dares to provoke an all-out war between me and the underground guild. Andre sneered as he muttered under his breath. He quickly took out a magic scroll from the scroll box and activated the spell stored on it without hesitation. Instantly, a few eyeball-shaped, magical creations appeared in front of him. They were only about 2 centimeters in diameter and looked very inconspicuous. However, they could use the anti-magic field to fly. Most importantly, each eyeball was connected to the spellcaster's optic nerve. No matter what they saw, the spellcaster could see the same scene. It was almost the same as a surveillance camera. This was the effect of the rank 5 arcane spell, Spying Magic Eye. Due to their small size, as long as they were kept at a certain distance, it was almost impossible to discover them. After a simple attempt to control more than 10 magical eyeballs at the same time, Andre quickly found the trick. He immediately let these little things monitor the woman who thought she hadn't been discovered. Then, through the telepathic connection, he let the magic pet, Little Eye, silently return to his side. After completing all this, all he had to do was wait. Wait for the woman to feel that she was safe, walk out of the corner she was hiding in, and report to her boss. However, the woman seemed to be very patient. She stayed in the same spot for more than 10 minutes, and then carefully walked out from the corner. She carefully examined the place where the battle had just taken place, especially the places that had been burned by the dark blue flames. She always crouched down and sniffed around, and even put a burnt stone in her pocket. Chapter 670. Interesting, isn't it? She's actually trying to find the secrets of the blue flames. Andre mocked the woman's actions in a mocking tone as he sat in an empty alleyway. His only audience was the meatball-like small eyes. Magical pets and mages had an inseparable connection. They could share sight, smell, hearing, taste, and touch with each other. Thus, Small Eyes could see everything that Andre could see. However, its slightly lower intelligence and chaotic and tyrannical thoughts meant that it couldn't understand what its master was trying to say. It could only stare at him with its large, innocent eyes in silence. However, Andre clearly didn't care if his magical pet could understand him or not. He continued, "Look carefully. This woman's steps are light and graceful, and she doesn't let go of any suspicious traces. She's obviously been trained professionally, and the strangest thing is that she doesn't fear flames like normal people. Let's guess, is she protected by a magical item, or is she hiding some unknown blood?" Before he could finish his sentence, the woman suddenly stood up and unfurled a pair of enormous black wings behind her back. She flapped them and quickly flew into the sky. Oh, damn it. She's a devil, a lustful demon from hell. No wonder she can ignore the damage of flames. Andre's eyes widened in shock, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. When he came to his senses, the first thing he did was to use the spying eye to chase after the woman. One had to know that lustful demons were different from succubi. They didn't have too many obvious markings on their bodies, such as horns on their heads or tails on their backs. In fact, many lustful demons looked exactly like humans, the only difference being their enormous black wings. If one couldn't even recognize this, then they wouldn't be worthy of being called an erudite mage. Of course, like many devils, lustful demons were completely immune to fire damage. In hell, they'd even soak in lava as a way to relax. Andre really couldn't think of anyone who had the ability to summon a journeyman devil in a place as desolate as Valen City. One had to know that only a 7th rank Arcane spell could do that, and a 7th rank Arcane spellcaster was at least to the 13th rank. He immediately felt a chill run down his spine at the thought of such a person hiding in the shadows. The demonic spying eye flew very quickly. It did not take long for it to catch up to the lustful demons in the sky. This beautiful and evil creature glided along the city's coastline at a leisurely pace, as if enjoying the coolness of the night wind gently caressing her skin. She had a slightly disdainful yet charming smile on her lips, as if she was mocking the foolishness of mortals and the destruction brought about by chaos. Demons were one of the most staunch supporters of order in the universe, so it was normal for them to show disdain for chaos. Although the order they followed was bureaucracy, tyranny, autocracy, and militarism, order was order, and evil order was also a manifestation of order. Most of the time, the evil order was often stronger than the good order. It was also this point that ensured that the demons could continue the war with the uncountable number of demons for hundreds of thousands of years, or even millions of years. After flying past the spacious harbor, the lustful demon suddenly began to descend. A short dozen seconds later, she landed on the deck of a uniquely designed warship. What was strange was that the sailors on the ship did not show any signs of fear. Instead, they respectfully bowed, as if they were already used to her presence. A pirate ship controlled by demons? Andre suddenly had a bad premonition. He hurriedly controlled the demonic spying eye to get closer and immediately saw a line of words written in red on the sail. Devil's ship. Casamercus, a demon in human skin, a mortal who seemed to have a close relationship with hell. In a very short time, detailed information about this ship and its captain appeared in Andre's mind one after another. He even suspected that the lower planes were trying to support an evil force in the material world. Otherwise, how could a mere pirate captain have the ability to control a powerful, lustful demon? In order to confirm his conjecture, he once again controlled the demonic spying eye to enter the cabin in an attempt to find some evidence. But the instant the magic eye passed through the sailor's lounge, ripples suddenly burst out in the air, as if it had collided with an invisible force field. Damn it, I've been discovered. As a mage, Andre immediately understood that he had encountered some kind of defensive barrier. He had never expected that a pirate ship would have such a high-level thing, so he was caught unprepared. Unfortunately, there was no medicine for regret in this world. In the blink of an eye, a man with red eyes rushed out. He waved the sharp blade in his hand and quickly destroyed all the demonic spying eyes, leaving no room for future trouble. Just before the last eye was destroyed, Andre saw him roar loudly at the lustful demon behind him, as if blaming it for being careless. Another fellow who wants to join this war? Or is he just a troublemaker? The situation is getting more and more complicated, more and more interesting, and more challenging. Recalling the scene that had come to an abrupt end, Andre narrowed his eyes and muttered softly to himself. He only had a rough impression of the captain of the devil's ship, Casamercus. He could not think of any motive for him to choose to join the fray at this chaotic moment. After all, even if he had the support of hell's demons, he only had a little over 100 pirates in the material world. He was not strong enough to ignore numbers, so he had no right to join this dangerous game. Everything seemed so strange, and there was a smell of conspiracy everywhere. Fortunately, Andre had long been used to all kinds of illogical phenomena surrounding him. After thinking for a few minutes, he decided not to dwell on it any longer. He dragged Angus, who was still unconscious, into a rotten and abandoned wooden house, intending to wake up the bald mage and see if he could be of use to him. With the all-out confrontation with the Underground Guild, he began to feel that he had too few subordinates under him, especially those with high-end strength. Compared to the rich and powerful enemies, they were a little lacking. Perhaps it was time to expand. After all, he did not have high requirements for loyalty, as long as they could guarantee that they would not betray him for about half a month. As for other aspects, he would think about it later. Chapter 671. The essence of war was to slowly strengthen oneself while continuously attacking the enemy, until the scales of victory tilted in favor of one side. Just as Andre was busy recruiting subordinates, a dozen or so armed youths gathered outside a noisy tavern on the other side of the city. They all had fierce gazes, as if waiting for a signal. Suddenly, in the distance, a casino that was still open for business erupted with deafening shouts of killing, followed by soaring flames that lit up the night sky. It was like a signal, a guiding light, illuminating the way for the young people lurking in the dark. The guy in the lead immediately raised his right fist in excitement and shouted, "Brothers, the time for revenge has finally come. Attack! Charge! Kill all these trash! Let them see our power!" The youths who had long since been unable to contain their excitement quickly activated the power hidden in their bloodline. In the blink of an eye, they grew thick fur and completely transformed into rats. They didn't hesitate at all, nor did they have any fear. They charged straight into the noisy tavern and started slaughtering the staff inside. From the thugs and bartenders to the waitresses and drunkards, anyone who was slightly slower to react would immediately be pierced through by sharp weapons. Due to years of bullying and oppression, every rat man had been suppressing an evil fire in their hearts. At this moment, it was completely released. Blood, slaughter, destruction. They had even forgotten the commandments set by Old Bernie, recklessly using their teeth and claws to spread the disease among ordinary people. Not long after, there were more than 10 customers who were bitten and scratched, screaming as they fled the scene. They had no idea what this terrifying scene meant. Once this highly contagious disease spread among normal people, a terrifying disaster would descend on the night of the next full moon. This time, there would be no pirates to help clean up the mess. In reality, the scene before their eyes was an exception. If one were to look over the entire Valence City, they would discover that many of the businesses belonging to the underground guilds had been crazily attacked. Some had even prepared firewood beforehand and burned them down. They didn't care about money or spoils of war, only wanting to satisfy their thirst for blood. In a short half an hour, more than half of the taverns, inns, and gambling dens of the underground guilds had been destroyed. Perhaps it was because they had not encountered any serious threats for a long time, or perhaps the leaders were busy dealing with the Owl Squad's annihilation. In short, the seemingly powerful guild was unable to react for a long time. Many of the members patrolling the streets could only watch helplessly as the groups of rat men left. They did not even dare to approach. There was nothing they could do about it. It wasn't that they weren't loyal enough, nor was it that they weren't brave enough. It was just that they knew that if they didn't have enough manpower to fight against a group of war creatures who carried fatal diseases, it would be fine if they didn't die, but if they were accidentally bitten, they would soon become one of them. Most importantly, they were also responsible for keeping an eye on everyone with bite marks. They tried their best not to miss anyone, so that when the higher-ups asked about it, they could provide a relatively complete statistics to prevent a large-scale outbreak of the disease. The impact of this attack was huge, so huge that many ambitious people saw the weak side of the city's rulers. At the same time, they saw a rare opportunity. With the Shadow Net's attack, too many problems had been exposed in the underground guilds. In particular, their control over the smaller guilds had plummeted. Many ambitious leaders were silently planning for themselves. Now, with the addition of the Ratmen, the situation was completely out of control. Looking at the chaotic streets, the panicking crowd, and the burning wooden buildings, Patty's face showed an unprecedented satisfaction. He turned his head and shouted to his comrades behind him, who had been completely stimulated. "Brothers, you've done a great job tonight. Reality has proven that the strength of the guilds is just a facade. They're no different from ordinary people. They can bleed and die just as well. The destroyed buildings and the killed enemies were all the best evidence. We have to make them remember. Today is just the beginning. As long as they don't surrender, our revenge will not stop. Now, let's cheer to our heart's content. Let's celebrate this hard-won victory. Long live. We will drink the blood of our enemies to our heart's content." Tonight was so satisfying. That's right. The old leader didn't need to be so cautious. As long as we unite, it's not impossible for us to replace the guilds and become the ruler of Valence City. The confidence of the young Ratmen, who had achieved an unprecedented victory in their first attack, quickly swelled. Although many of them had died, these losses were insignificant compared to the glorious results of the battle. This was especially true for those who had killed with their own hands. They boasted loudly to their comrades and took pride in it. Young, impulsive, childish, and arrogant. The common problems of young people were vividly displayed in these Ratmen. They had no idea that they were being used, and even more so, didn't know what kind of dire situation their actions would put their clan in. The strength of the underground guilds was far from being as incompetent as they were currently displaying. The wealth, reputation, and power they had accumulated over hundreds of years was no joke. However, any country or organization that had been established for a long time would inevitably have the problem of being overstaffed. Add to that the restrictions of various rules and regulations, it was natural that they wouldn't be able to react quickly. At this moment, a solemn meeting was being held in the headquarters of the Uptown Guilds. A round table was placed in the spacious hall on the second floor. Several mysterious masked men sat around the table. They were uniformly dressed in luxurious black robes, giving off a very mysterious feeling. Without a doubt, these people were the leaders of the underground guilds, the true rulers of Valence City. Every one of them had a large interest group standing behind them. In order to protect themselves, they usually didn't show their true faces to others, which was why they were dressed so strangely. The middle-aged man in the lead furrowed his brows and stared at the number 1 assassin kneeling on the ground. After a full minute, he asked, "Ulick, you can be considered an old member of the guild. Tell me, what should we do in this situation?" "Sir, we don't have any good methods to deal with that young mage. We can only let the professionals deal with him. However, the other participants must be dealt with as harshly as possible. Otherwise, it will be very troublesome to deal with them after we lose all face." Ulick, who had just completely destroyed the entire owl squad, carefully answered the leader's question. Chapter 672. Ever since he had escaped death and returned to the headquarters, the first thing Ulick did was to use the authority in his hands to inform the few leaders as quickly as possible. He did not dare to hide anything at all. This was because he was very clear that perhaps reporting the truth would bring him a lot of trouble, and he might even be severely punished. However, the consequences of lying were even more severe. If the leaders did not understand the true strength of the enemy, then the entire guild would face a severe test. If the rule of the underground guild was overthrown, as an executioner whose hands were stained with blood and enemies everywhere, he would definitely be the first unlucky one. After weighing the pros and cons, this assassin who was not too stupid confessed everything. This included how he had obtained information from Casimir, how he had mobilized the Night Owls to launch an attack without authorization, and how he had been crushed by the powerful magical power in the end, and how he had seen Isidore and Angus descend from the sky when he was escaping. After a short conversation, the meeting room once again fell into a deathly silence. Even though everything below the eyes was covered by masks and did not reveal much of their expressions. It could be seen from the eyes of every leader and the heavy atmosphere around them that their hearts were quite heavy at the moment. Mage, the master of the arcane power. He could release a powerful supernatural power that ordinary people could not understand at all with just a raise of his hand. Although they did not believe that a mere mage could go against a huge guild, they could not help but feel nervous when they thought of the terrifying means that the other party had used to kill all the members of the Night Owls in an instant. After all, no matter how many resources a guild controlled, it still needed to rely on people to operate. It needed to rely on force to deter the subordinate guilds and maintain basic order on the surface. Once the massacre of the direct elites happened a few more times, they would immediately face the danger of having no one to rely on. When that time came, there would be no need for outsiders to launch an attack. A huge internal conflict would erupt, and it would fall apart. The so-called underground guild was just a general term, a place used to balance power and resolve conflicts, a joint organization to suppress other competitors. Its main power came from the 6 guilds that had survived from the era of the first Pirate King. In essence, it still retained a lot of autonomy, just like a huge joint stock company, where every leader was a major shareholder. If there was a major problem with the entire company, then in order to ensure that their own interests were not damaged, there would definitely be people who could not help but propose to withdraw their shares or reach a secret agreement with the enemy in private. Betrayal and betrayal were human instincts, especially in the face of survival and benefits. So-called family, friendship, and love weren't worth mentioning. Even though they hadn't reached the point of betraying each other, the leaders weren't fools. They all knew that if they couldn't get rid of the young mage the assassin mentioned, it would only be a matter of time before this happened. Silence. An oppressive silence. After a full 10 minutes, the masked man sitting on the right side of the door took a deep breath and asked in a heavy tone, "Ulick, do you think Isidore and Master Angus can kill our enemies directly?" "I'm very sorry, Your Excellency. I'm not a spellcaster, and I don't know what a battle between wizards looks like, so I have no way of judging. However, our spies have already set off. I believe it won't be long before they return with results." Ulick didn't dare to make wild guesses and didn't dare to voice the fear in his heart. He would never be able to forget the scene of the owl squad dying like moths to a flame. He would also never be able to forget those members who had suffered such a huge mental blow that they had completely collapsed and would rather end their lives by committing suicide. Perhaps in the eyes of the leaders, this death was just a series of numbers, but to him, it was an eternal nightmare. Damn it, what a bunch of trash. We spend hundreds of thousands of gold coins every year to raise a bunch of trash like this? Wizards. I mentioned this more than 10 years ago. We need to raise our own wizards. But you guys always said that the cost was too high. Look at it now. The enemy alone has forced us into a dilemma. A woman with a more violent temper suddenly stood up, slamming the table and growling in a low voice. She was like an angry lioness, and her roar made a few people feel ashamed. Shut up. This isn't the time to complain. Moreover, raising wizards isn't as easy as you think. Let's not talk about how much it costs to start from scratch. Just the loyalty alone can't be guaranteed. Do you think that after gaining great power, they will continue to be controlled by us? A wizard's loyalty is only to magic. We can't give them what they want. Are you saying that the guild has to spend a lot of money to raise a few fellows who are destined to betray us? Another man slammed the table as well, not showing any weakness as he loudly retorted. He clearly understood the way wizards thought. Wizards who truly had the ability to step into a higher level would not be bought over by money, power, and beauty. They only had one goal in their eyes, and that was to explore the sea of knowledge and pursue the glory of the ancient magic civilization. Seeing that the two men were about to quarrel, the leader hurriedly waved his hand to stop them. "All right, sit down calmly. The debate about raising wizards ends here. You should know that we have already voted on this matter, and the answer is no. We don't have the ability to raise our own wizards under the premise of guaranteeing their loyalty. However, in the face of a powerful spellcaster, we're not completely powerless. At least, the secret wizard tower led by Master Jalal will always be on our side. If we can't get a satisfactory result tonight, I'll go there myself tomorrow morning. So, you don't have to be too worried." Before he could finish speaking, there was a sudden rush of footsteps in the corridor outside, followed by a knock on the thick door, and a panting voice could be heard. "Phew, phew, phew. Respected leaders, something bad has happened. Our scout just returned and reported that he found a corpse at the scene of the incident. Judging from the appearance, it should be Master Isidore." "What? That's impossible." Ulick, who was kneeling on the ground, suddenly stood up, his eyes revealing a look of disbelief. He had seen the old wizard's mysterious methods with his own eyes and could not believe that he would die at the hands of a young man. The masked leaders were not much better. Although they were still forcing themselves to be calm, the panic in their eyes could not fool anyone. The messenger standing outside the door swallowed his saliva and explained with a bitter smile, "I didn't quite believe it at first, but our people brought the corpse back, and we can check it at any time. Also, I have bad news. More than half an hour ago, the most profitable inns, taverns, and casinos of the guild were attacked by the Ratmen. All of them have been lost, and they're even unscrupulously biting ordinary people with their teeth. I believe you know what this means." Chapter 673. Damn it. He's spreading the beastification disease. Has old Bernie gone mad? He's declaring war on US. After hearing the grievous news brought by her subordinates, the woman who had been suppressing her anger for a long time could no longer suppress her emotions. She started to curse while gnashing her teeth. As someone who had personally experienced the rat plague, she felt her entire body tremble when she recalled what had happened that year. Especially the night of the outbreak. The horror was indescribable with words. Even the most determined person would have nightmares for an entire year after seeing it. The beastification disease was a taboo in the entire southern region. Although the beastified people were also a type of human and had the same intelligence and habits as humans, even looking exactly the same when they didn't transform, apart from mages who were full of curiosity, most normal people simply couldn't accept living with them. This complicated relationship was equivalent to a person with AIDS and a healthy person. Although everyone knew that they wouldn't be infected as long as they didn't have any blood contact or sexual activity, once someone was infected with AIDS, the people around them would instantly keep their distance. The beastified people were even more severely ostracized, especially the rat men who had once brought great harm to Valen City. Apart from them, everyone else saw them as a natural disaster. The man in the lead clenched his fists nervously and stared at the others. He said in a low voice, "Looks like we have to make preparations for an all-out war. But before that, since I'm going to ask old Bernie if he has any explanation. I remember that not long ago, he promised us that the rat men would never initiate an attack. Things have already reached this stage. Is there still a need to ask? That old fox must have thrown in his lot with that young mage. Otherwise, with his cautious personality, how could he make such a bold move?" "Agreed. This is already an act of war. There's no need to speak any more nonsense. We should retaliate as quickly as possible." "That's right. I agree. I agree as well. All right, since you've all said so, I now officially announce that from this moment on, we have officially entered a state of war with old Bernie, effective immediately." As he spoke, the man in the lead fiercely slammed the table. He knew very well that the guild might not have any good methods to deal with a powerful mage, but they had at least 2 backup plans to deal with the Ratmen. After all, the Ratmen had been a huge threat to the guild for a long time. In order to prevent the terrible disaster from happening again, they had prepared many emergency measures. Now, they could finally use them. Of course, the most important thing was that before the enemy mages were taken care of, the guild needed a common enemy that they could unite against, so that everyone could vent the anger and fear in their hearts. Otherwise, it would quickly become a huge hidden danger. Most of the time, waiting was the most terrifying thing. You didn't know where the enemy would come from, what methods they would use, whether you would die, how you would die, or if it would be painful. The guild leaders were well aware of this, so they decided to launch a war against the rat men to divert the attention of their subordinates. At the very least, they wouldn't have time to think too much. This way, they could temporarily ensure that there wouldn't be any internal chaos. With the official declaration of war, the huge and bloated organization of the Underground Guild began to quickly operate. More than 10 spies quickly shuttled through the streets and alleys of the city, and hundreds of fully armed thugs gathered in a short 2 hours. They went straight to the border of the harbor and surrounded the territory of the Ratmen. Their actions caused the originally chaotic city to completely lose control. There were no longer any merchants or peddlers in the market, and all kinds of taverns and inns were closed one after another. The residents used wooden planks to completely seal the doors and windows of their houses, carefully observing the movements outside through the cracks of their doors. The merchants also returned to the ships docked in the bay at the first moment, and without saying anything, they returned directly. Only a few daring fellows didn't choose to leave because they smelled an opportunity from the tense situation. Investing in a war was always the business with the highest returns, the biggest benefits, and the most exciting. It was like a gamble with all of one's wealth and life. As long as the gamble was right, the benefits would be unimaginable. Especially in a war like this, where the fate of a city was determined, it was definitely enough to make speculators eager to try. However, what was happening outside was not worth the attention of the guild leaders. Since the orders were issued, they handed over the command to their subordinates and sat in the meeting room, staring blankly at the corpse that had just been carried in. Julian squatted on the ground, carefully examining the wound. After more than 10 minutes, he stood up and said with a serious expression, "That's right, this is Master Angus's body. There are many residual burn scars all over his body, probably caused by some kind of fire magic. In addition, there's a penetrating wound on his chest. Judging from the size of the wound and the degree of bleeding, the murder weapon was a short sword or a long dagger. The angle of the stab was very tricky and very sudden. The enemy's method was very ruthless, completely crushing the heart without any signs of struggle. It was this sword that caused his death. I can swear that the person who could do this is definitely a top assassin. He first used stealth techniques to get close to the target, then seized the opportunity to launch a sneak attack." "You mean to say Master Angus died from a physical attack?" After hearing the assassin's judgment, a slightly shorter leader stood up and asked loudly in shock. He could not believe that a 9th-level mage could be killed by a short sword. Why were high-level mages revered by ordinary people? It was not because they could create fireballs, lightning, and strong acid out of thin air, and it was also not because they could easily kill people. It was because you never knew what the mage's next attack or defense would be. The unknown was the root of all fear. However, from Julian's description, this leader felt that Angus's actions were all seen through by the enemy, and even predicted his next move. It was like a murder script that had been written, forcing this powerful old mage into a dead end step by step. Terrifying scheming. Terrifying methods. Just thinking about it made one shudder. Seeing the fear in the eyes of the others, the leader took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "Looks like we need to talk to Casimir Kiz. No problem. I'll arrange it now. He must also want to talk to us now." Julian understood the intentions of the leaders. He hurriedly bowed, turned, and disappeared into the dim corridor. Chapter 674. The midnight sea breeze gently blew through the bleak streets, taking away the unbearable humidity and heat of the early summer. Although the city was already engulfed in the flames of war, small-scale conflicts and killings were everywhere, especially around the docks. The Rat Men and the underground guilds were already in formation. Once they started fighting, there would be rivers of blood. However, these were all power struggles between the big shots and had nothing to do with the ordinary people. To the ordinary people, they only wanted to know when this turmoil would end and when order would be restored so that they could have food to eat and not starve to death. Unfortunately, even such a humble wish couldn't be realized. They could only hide in their homes and carefully calculate their remaining food and water. Once they ran out, They would have to take the risk of going out on the streets to rob others. If they weren't careful, they would die. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened in Valen City, so most of the residents knew what they had to do. They all obediently stayed indoors and patiently waited for the results. After all, no matter if the underground guilds successfully suppressed the riots or the rat men won, they would all try to restore order and prosperity to the city. When the time came, there would definitely be people going door to inform the residents. In a desolate alley, a tabby cat was lying on a roof beam with a raw fish that it had stolen from God knows where in its mouth, peacefully enjoying its midnight snack. Its appearance was comfortable and leisurely, as if the conflict between humans didn't affect its appetite at all. Suddenly, the cat seemed to have discovered something. Its ears pricked up in alertness, and its two green eyes stared at a dilapidated and abandoned wooden house not far away. After a short 2 seconds, two young men of the same height and appearance walked out from inside. One of them was topless and had a cloak around his waist. His face was filled with a faint smile, and he seemed to be in a very good mood. The other was the exact opposite. Although he was dressed appropriately, his face was very pale, and he couldn't hide the sense of defeat in his eyes. After the topless young man walked onto the street, he smiled and said to his other self behind him, Be happy, Angus, my dear friend. You have to know that you just made a very good choice. I promise that after this matter is completed, you will receive a generous reward. Happy? I'm sorry, but I'm not happy at all. At least, before you deal with Gerald Jenkinson, we can't even guarantee our own safety, not to mention the reward. Another young man curled his lips, his tone full of helplessness. Don't worry. Give me a few days. Gerald Jenkinson doesn't have a specific position, and it won't be difficult to persuade him. Besides, if he doesn't want to accept my kindness, I'll have to ask him to go to another world. As he spoke, a cold light flashed in the eyes of the topless young man. He was none other than Andre himself. As for the other one, he was the bald mage Angus, who had used the shape-shifting spell to make himself look exactly like Andre. It was clear that the two of them had reached some sort of agreement. Angus had chosen to betray the Magus Tower regardless of whether he had taken the initiative or not, so he appeared to be rather nervous and uneasy. Andre's mood was just the opposite. After obtaining the loyalty of a 9th-level mage, the power he had grasped had expanded to the point that it was enough to contend with the underground guilds. However, considering the strange behavior of Casimir Kiz, Andre didn't do so. Instead, he let the bald mage change into his appearance and continued to attract the enemy's attention. He planned to use Uhtred's identity to sneak into the Magus Tower and take advantage of the fact that everyone's attention was focused on the chaotic situation in the city to get rid of the biggest hidden danger in one fell swoop. After all, that was the Magus Tower. Even the worst Magus Tower had very powerful power. Borrowing its power, the mages could cast high-level arcane spells that were beyond their own ability. They could break through the limitations of the spell slots and make the enemy die in a flash of lightning or a sea of fire. Once the Magus Tower was under his control, there wouldn't be any power in the entire Sardinia Islands that could interfere with the plan. Even if Casimir had the support of the forces of hell, it would be useless. Angus, who had changed into Andre's appearance, obviously knew that his mission was to act as bait. However, he had no choice, so he took a deep breath and nodded lightly. All right, I hope the plan will really go as smoothly as you said. In addition, I will use your identity to make a ruckus in the city these few days. I will create as much trouble for the underground guilds as possible so that they won't have time to pay attention to what's happening at the Magus Tower. Very good, this is the effect I want. Now, let's exchange secret imprints. If there's anything, we can contact each other directly. Remember, no matter who comes to contact you, don't give them any answer. It's best if you don't even say a word. After saying that, Andre raised his hand and snapped his fingers. A mark of a slightly opened eye quickly appeared in the air. Angus also snapped his fingers, and a badger-shaped mark appeared in front of him. The two didn't say any more nonsense. They each opened their own spell books and copied the other's secret imprint. Then, they turned around and left without saying a word. Andre wasn't the least bit worried that Angus would betray him, nor was he worried that he would secretly play any tricks. This was because this bald mage had already been forced to sign a harsh magic agreement when his life was in danger. The duration of the agreement was 10 years. If he betrayed Andre in the slightest during this period, his soul would fall into the abyss and suffer unimaginable pain and torment. Walking in the deserted alley, Andre was in a rather good mood. He even softly hummed an unknown tune. Although tonight's unexpected situation was out of his expectations, the result was very beneficial to the whole plan. Not only did he obtain a large amount of information, but he also subdued a powerful mage. The spoils of war were especially generous, especially the level 4 spell that Angus had just handed over, Transfiguration. It solved a lot of problems with his identity. The effect of this Transfiguration Arcane spell was to allow the target to completely transform into another person. This included height, weight, appearance, the length of each strand of hair, the color of the pupils, and so on. It could be said that apart from genes, even the fingerprints would be exactly the same. With the help of the Transfiguration spell, Andre no longer had to carefully calculate the duration of the last bottle of secondary Transfiguration potion. He could go all out. Glancing at the notes on the parchment in his hand, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. He said to himself, "Next, I'll find a quiet place and copy the Transfiguration spell into a spellbook. Then I'll get some clothes. I don't want to appear in front of others naked." Chapter 675. Walking along the dark and quiet streets, Andre slowly walked barefoot through the deathly silent slums of Valen City. It didn't take long for him to arrive at the relatively safer upper city. Just like the layout of most cities in the Oleal continent, the rich and powerful usually like to gather in places with higher terrains, so as to reflect their different identities and statuses. The closer one was to the pirate castle at the highest point of Valen City. The more ridiculously wealthy the residents would be. Some of the manors were so extravagant that they didn't pale in comparison to the Duke's manors in Linton City. After all, to the smugglers living in the underground world, no matter how much money they earned, they couldn't openly spend their money in the open. Otherwise, the deeply rooted nobles would investigate everything in minutes and use their power to bankrupt them. Therefore, many smugglers chose to build manors in Valen City and enjoy an incomparably luxurious life. Unfortunately, there was nothing perfect in this world, although no one here cared about identity, bloodline, or the origin of their wealth. The unstable situation could turn everything to nothing at any time. For example, most of the manors were empty right now, and there weren't even many servants left behind. This was because they knew that once the conflicts spread to the entire city, these seemingly luxurious manors would become the first targets of the bandits. Seemingly sturdy walls wouldn't be able to protect them at all, so they might as well return to their simple homes. Savoring the wondrous feeling of personally pushing a city into the abyss, Andre didn't head straight for the secret entrance to the Wizard Tower. Instead, he chose a seemingly empty 2-story mansion. He didn't have the slightest intention of knocking on the door. Instead, he had Little Eye destroy the lock with a frost ray and gently pushed open the door to walk into the front yard. Early summer in the south was the season when flowers bloomed. Perhaps due to the influence of a noble's elegant style, the owner of the house had planted large amounts of expensive blue roses. A gentle breeze instantly revealed a sea of flowers, especially the rich fragrance that made one feel as if they were in a fairy tale. Truly extravagant to the extreme. No wonder people say that humans have endless greed and desire to possess all the beautiful things in the world, even if they don't know how to appreciate them. Andre sighed at the beautiful scenery in front of him as he continued to walk towards the front door of the house. He had once heard Chloe mention that the blue rose was the most expensive type of rose. It was cultivated by a baroness hundreds of years ago and symbolized unique love. Each rose was worth more than 1 silver coin. It was the first choice of wealthy nobles to give to their lovers. There were at least tens of thousands of blue roses in the garden. Just the seeds alone cost thousands of gold coins. It proved how profitable the smuggling industry was. Otherwise, where would the smugglers get so much money to pursue sensual and spiritual enjoyment, although this pursuit was as ridiculous as the nouveau riche? However, Andre did not intend to laugh at the owner of the house. He only wanted to enter the house to find some clothes, socks, and boots that fit him. Then, he would borrow the study to learn transfiguration and rest for a few hours. In order to avoid any possible disturbances, he did not go through the front door. Instead, he used his teleportation ability to fly to the balcony on the second floor and directly pushed open the window and walked into the house. Perhaps it was because they had left in a hurry. The living room on the second floor was a mess. Vases, sculptures, and paintings could be seen everywhere. Basically, all the valuable things had been packed up and taken away. The remaining things were either fake or too big to be moved. Without stopping, Andre quickly pushed open the door of the living room and walked along the corridor to check the rooms one by one. It did not take long for him to find a room full of bookshelves and books. Looking at the neatly arranged books and scrolls, he gently shook his head and sighed. Just as I expected, these smugglers are too narrow-minded. They don't know how precious knowledge is. If a noble family was fleeing, the first thing they would protect would be the books in the study, not the gold and silver. Having said that, Andre casually picked up a few simple books and flipped through a few pages before putting them back in their original places. The more he read, the more he could not help but want to teach the owner of the house a lesson on how to respect knowledge and books. It was clear that the smuggler was only here to collect information. He hadn't read any of the books in the study, especially the unique books on geography, philosophy, and monsters. Even a Linton City wizard library didn't have any records of them. Although he did not have the time to sit down and carefully savor the knowledge in every book, Andre could pack them all up. After doing all this, he took out the Transfiguration Scroll and devoted himself to learning magic. Perhaps because he was too focused, he did not notice a small figure curled up in a corner in the corridor, staring at the study with two big bright eyes. Time passed by, second by second. The small figure seemed to be very interested in Andre, who was learning magic, and had no intention of leaving. He was already attracted by the constantly flickering arcane light in the air, and could not help but slowly walk out from the corner. Without a doubt, this was a thin and weak boy about 10 years old. He wore dirty linen shorts on his legs and carried a large pile of clothes and food in his arms. He was obviously a thief from the lower city. Closer and closer, closer and closer. The boy could even see Andre's complicated spell-casting movements and could hear the jerky and complicated incantations. For some reason, his body began to tremble slightly. He raised his skinny arms and began to imitate the level 4 spell, Transfiguration. What was unbelievable was that his movements and incantations actually triggered the magical energy in the air around him. A dazzling light began to surround him. The spell that Andre could not learn in an hour, he actually managed to learn it in a few seconds. What terrifying talent! Although he was still a long way from mastering the spell, his current performance was enough to make all the mages blush with shame. As the energy vibrations in the air grew stronger, Small Eye, a magical creature, sensed the presence of the boy and immediately transmitted its discovery to its master. Andre was instantly shocked. He hurriedly stopped his spell-casting movements and looked at the boy behind the bookshelf who had entered a spell-casting state with an incredulous expression. The violent power of the arcane art was rapidly gathering in his body, just like a huge magnet, a black hole that could never be filled. Chapter 676. Everyone on the Oleo continent knew that it was very dangerous to interrupt a spell that was in the middle of casting. The higher the level of the spell, the more energy would be gathered and controlled. Once the spell went out of control, it could cause serious injuries or even death to the caster. In the worst case, it could cause a disaster like a landslide or a tsunami. Although the magic energy gathered by the boy was not enough to threaten Andre's safety, he still did not disturb him in any way. Instead, he carefully prepared for the danger and waited for the boy to complete the spell or fail to cast it. No one wanted to be affected by the loss of control of Arcana, because you never knew what the consequences would be. Sometimes, even if nothing happened, strange things would happen after a while. For example, a man would suddenly turn into a woman, or some organs would disappear or lose their functions. In short, according to the description in the book, Arcana Principles and Composition, all magic in the world was made up of primitive energy, and these energy particles contained countless possibilities. They could be shaped into any shape in nature. When the spell went out of control, it was not surprising that accidents would happen. This was also why many mages believed that they had to be careful when using their own power. Most of the time, they would rather use more complicated strategies than use powerful spells to crush their enemies. Although Andre did not agree with this conservative idea, he was not an extremist like Ulysses the Necromancer who believed in using magic to solve all problems. Feeling the vibration of the energy in the air getting more and more intense, he quickly realized that the spell model was about to be completed. So he immediately kicked the table over and used it as a shield. Reality proved that this action was absolutely necessary. In just a second, a visible energy shockwave spread rapidly from the boy to the surroundings. Everything that was touched by the energy changed strangely, especially the bookshelves around. They twisted into a terrible spiral shape, and the floor cracked into uneven and irregular slopes. The walls and the ceiling merged together in an unbelievable way, like an arched bridge. As for the table that Andre used as a shield in front of him, well, it could not be called a table anymore. The energy of the transmutation arcana had turned it into a four-legged wooden horse. What was even more unbelievable was that the drawers and the things inside the drawers were not damaged at all. The door of the room changed from a rectangular shape with a height of 2 meters and a width of 60 centimeters to an oval shape of the same area, and it was even upside down. Andre narrowed his eyes and muttered to himself as he looked at the strange and wonderful scene before him. Unbelievable. A child can actually release such a powerful force. Could it be that there's some secret hidden in his body? The boy was clearly shocked by the damage he had caused. He stared at his hands with his eyes wide open. He stood there in a daze, unable to recover for a long time. There was no doubt that there was a problem with the spell model he constructed, which was why the transformation was not complete in the end. However, the uncontrollable energy was released in a different form, resulting in the current result. Andre looked at the boy's confused face and sighed. He said, "Kid, come here, I have a few questions for you." What's the problem?" The boy cautiously took 2 steps back and kept looking back at the door behind him, as if he could run away at any time. "Relax, child. I mean you no harm. Perhaps you don't even know what you just did, but I can tell you clearly that you almost completed a 4th-tier spell. Do you know what that means? That's something that only a 7th-tier mage can do, but you did it just by feeling and imitation." Andre tried to explain the situation as concisely and easily as possible, because he now understood why the boy could do such a thing. It was because he was a natural-born warlock. Unlike mages who relied on their wisdom and research to obtain arcane power, warlocks obtained arcane power either through their innate instincts or by relying on the special blood flowing in their veins. Obviously, the boy was attracted by the transformation spell and activated the power that had been dormant in his body for many years. This power was so powerful that it was far beyond his control. Perhaps because he realized that Andre did not mean any harm, the boy calmed down a little. He licked his dry lips and asked carefully, "You mean I have the talent to become a mage?" Andre smiled and shook his head. "No, child. You will never become a mage because you are a natural-born warlock. Can you tell me about your family situation? For example, who are your parents?" "Warlock? What's that?" As a poor person who struggled on the verge of death, the boy did not know much about the power system of Oriar. He had never even heard of the word warlock. Warlocks are also known as natural-born spellcasters. They are born with powerful magic power, but this power is hidden in the depths of their body, heart, or soul, waiting for the day when it can be released. Of course, warlocks and mages are very similar to each other to some extent, but there's a saying that distinguishes them very well. Mages choose magic on their own initiative, while warlocks are the opposite. It is magic that chooses them. Judging from your performance just now, if I'm not wrong, this should be the first time in your life that you have shown your power, right? It's very interesting, isn't it? I can feel that you must be very confused, but also very excited. But remember, the power of arcane magic is not that easy to control. It is far more dangerous than you can imagine. Maybe you were lucky this time and did not suffer any harm. But the goddess of luck will not always favor a mortal. Without systematic learning, the consequences of imitating a high-level spell will definitely be enough to kill you 10 times over. Andre had never thought that he would meet a newly awakened warlock in such a situation. He was full of curiosity, wanting to know where the boy's power came from. Was it the supernatural blood flowing in his body? Or was it, as some scholars speculated, from the magic nodes, or from the influence of another world? The boy clearly felt the excitement in Andre's eyes. He took 2 steps back in fear, but for some reason, he did not turn around and run away. Instead, he mustered up his courage and asked, "Why are you telling me this?" "Why?" "Ha!" Andre smiled and spread out his hands. "It's very simple. Because warlocks are very rare. To be exact, they are very rare. I'm very interested in them. That's all." Chapter 677. No one knew where the first warlock of Orire came from, and no one knew the reason for the birth of these individuals who were born with a strong affinity for magic. The only thing that was known was that the offspring of a supernatural being and a mortal had a certain chance of becoming a warlock. In ancient times, humans made use of this to create a large number of warlock families. Some of the more famous families even continued to this day through close relationships. However, with the erosion of time, more and more warlock families completely died out and eventually became ordinary people. However, there was not only one way to create a warlock. After the research of many scholars and mages, they found that there were other ways for ordinary people to become a warlock. For example, the touch of demons, the blessing of tree spirits and water fairies on newborns, the magic and mysterious spring water, the gift of the gods, exposure to the violent chaotic magic of the elemental plane or the chaos sea, and even a special understanding of the universal laws. All of these could ignite the spark of arcane talent, and with a little guidance, they could become a qualified warlock. Andre did not know which type the boy in front of him belonged to, but from his performance just now, his talent was undoubtedly very strong, and his body did not show any obvious abnormalities. He was very valuable for research. "You mean my ability is very rare, and there's no monster in my body?" The boy's voice trembled, and his eyes were bloodshot. Tears were swirling in his eyes, and he looked especially agitated, as if he could cry at any time. "Yes, although I still don't know where your ability comes from, it is undoubtedly very rare, even rarer than mages. If the number of mages in the whole continent is compared to 50, then the number of warlocks is 1. As for monsters, in the eyes of ordinary people, anyone who has mastered power that they cannot understand will be called a monster. That is a kind of ignorance, It doesn't mean that there is a monster in your body. Can you understand this explanation?" In order to divert the boy's attention, Andre deliberately made a more vivid analogy. He could understand the boy's complicated feelings. In particular, the Sardinia Islands were originally a desert of magic. Ordinary people simply could not understand what the abnormal phenomenon that appeared on the warlocks meant, and they all blamed it on demons or devils. Since they were demons and devils, their attitude naturally wouldn't be good. Ostracism, humiliation, and beatings were all light punishments. If things didn't go well, they might even be captured and burned alive. It couldn't be helped. In this world where the illiteracy rate was as high as 99%, it was more realistic to expect ordinary people to understand mysterious spells than to expect pigs to fly. Obviously, from the way the boy was dressed and his severely malnourished body condition, it could be seen that he must have suffered a lot and lived a very difficult life. To be honest, Andre was a little afraid that this little guy would suddenly cry, and then he would have a headache. One had to know that he was not the type of person who knew how to comfort others. Whether it was a woman's tears or a child's coquettishness, he had a feeling that he did not know where to start. Unfortunately, the more one was afraid, the easier it was for things to happen. In less than 2 minutes after he finished speaking, the tears in the boy's eyes flowed down uncontrollably. As he wiped his tears, he muttered to himself, "Is that so? So this is a kind of talent, a kind of powerful strength. I always thought that I was like what everyone said. The devil living in my body will only bring disaster and misfortune. Devil? Oof. To think that this group of idiots could think of such a thing. If the devil is so kind to bestow the power of a sorcerer to a mortal for no reason, then it shouldn't be called a devil at all, but a divine servant of the heavens." Andre sneered and mocked. He did not hide his disgust for this kind of behavior, and it could even be said that he hated it. His eyes were filled with a cold light that made people feel cold all over. Greed, jealousy, anti-intellectualism. These were the bad habits that ran through the development of human society, and it seemed that they could never be eradicated. They were like shadows, constantly lurking in the dark, and with the slightest bit of carelessness, they would sneak out and wreak havoc. Countless knowledge, talents, research results, cultural products, and so on were destroyed in the hands of a group of idiots. Andre could almost predict that if the boy in front of him did not meet him today and did not awaken the spell-casting talent in his body, then what awaited him would definitely be an incomparably miserable end. Perhaps he would die of an illness, or die of hunger and cold, or die of punches and kicks. In any case, the probability of him living to adulthood was definitely less than 5%. It doesn't matter. Anyway, no matter what others say, I'm already used to it. Thank you, respected Mr. Mage. You let me understand that I'm not a devil. That's enough. The boy wiped away his tears and bowed deeply. Enough? No, child. Although forgiveness is a virtue, not everyone deserves it. Now tell me, do you want to take revenge on those bastards who bullied and humiliated you? Don't worry, as long as you nod your head, I can take care of everything for you. The city is now very chaotic, so chaotic that a few more corpses won't attract anyone's attention. After saying that, Andre raised his head and stared at the other party with a very serious expression. The boy felt the murderous aura, and he did not doubt that as long as he nodded his head, this young mage, who was only a few years older than him, would kill all those bastards who bullied and humiliated him. But he did not do so. Instead, he smiled bitterly and shook his head. Forget it. There's no need for that, Mr. Mage. You said it yourself. They are all stupid idiots, so what if I kill them all? Even my parents abandoned me because of these rumors, let alone a group of outsiders. The suffering of childhood made the boy mature beyond his peers. His eyes were always clear, and there was never a trace of resentment. Andre shrugged his shoulders nonchalantly. All right, since you insist, I'll give it to you. Now, let's talk about your future. Although warlocks don't need to go through systematic learning like mages, they still need to have some understanding of arcane spells and magic principles. Most importantly, you need to understand where your power comes from and how to display it. Simply put, you need a guide. I understand. After imitating the spell just now, I understand that it is very difficult to control these powers. If you don't mind, I would like to follow by your side and learn. Of course, as a price, I am willing to be your follower, servant, and research subject. Whatever you want me to do, I will do. The boy clearly understood his situation very well, and also knew how rare the opportunity in front of him was, so he directly showed his utmost sincerity, because he thirsted for power and wanted to get rid of the precarious life of poverty. Chapter 678. Humans were a race that hated to stay the same. They longed to change their fate, whether they were poor, rich, or powerful. The king longed to expand his kingdom. The nobles longed to gain more territory. The merchants longed to earn more profits. The farmers longed to have a good harvest every year. And the professionals longed to improve their profession level. However, To get all of this, one must have great power, enough power to defeat all enemies, the power to change fate. Magic was the most powerful power known to most mortals. Although it was incomparably violent and dangerous, it still could not stop those who flocked to it like a flock of ducks. They were even willing to give up everything for it. Obviously, the boy had been abandoned by human society. He had no relatives, no friends, and no worries. He only wanted to get rid of his poor life, even if he had to give up his freedom and life. Perhaps for those who were full all day, shouting about freedom, equality, and human rights, they would never understand the price a person was willing to pay in order to survive, but Andre, who had lived in this backward world for more than 4 years, understood. Especially in the first year, when he led a group of children to struggle for survival in the Black Forest. At that time, if someone gave him a hot soup or a warm house, he was willing to give up everything, even his soul. Without any hesitation, Andre stretched out his right hand and said with a smile, "You are a smart child, even smarter than most adults. I accept your conditions and promise to teach you how to use your power. Let me introduce myself. My name is Andre Blanchflower. Hello, Mr. Andre. I don't have a name, nor a surname, but they all call me Calamity." The boy took 2 steps forward and stretched out his dirty little hand. He looked very reserved, and his eyes revealed anticipation and fear for the future. No name? That's not good. Everyone should have their own name. If you don't mind, how about I give you one? After all, I can't always call you Child or Calamity, right? Andre, who saw the boy's nervousness, deliberately found a more relaxed topic, trying to make the boy relax a little. Name? Of course I don't mind. I dream of having my own name. Please give me a name. When the little fellow heard the 2 words name, not only did he not relax, he became even more agitated. Even his voice was slightly trembling. In the eyes of some people, a name was just a code, but in the eyes of many people who didn't even have a name, it represented the meaning of their existence. Even the poorest serf would be willing to spend a lot of money to ask priests or scholars in the temple to give their children a good name. Obviously, the boy had been abandoned by his parents when he was very young. He didn't even have a name of his own, so a name wasn't just a code for him, it was also a new starting point. How about Alfred? In the ancient language, it means a wise helper, a wise advisor. After thinking for a while, Andre gave a name. To be honest, the reason why he cared so much for this little guy was because of his selfishness, and he had never concealed this selfishness. Now, he was even using the convenience of naming to express his intentions. A warlock, especially one that had just awakened, was a rare talent for any organization or individual. With a little training, he could become a qualified assistant. Moreover, during the training process, he could observe and study the source of the warlock's magic power at a close distance. It was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. In the original plan, Andre had intended to take in the warlock of Shadow Web, Elf, under his command. But now that there was a better one, that fatty was no longer in his hunting range. Even a fool would know the price to pay to obtain the loyalty of an adult, but to obtain the loyalty of a child, the price was less than 1/100th of the former. Alfred? I have a name. Ha ha, I finally have a name. The boy's eyes became brighter and brighter, and finally he laughed happily. There was a trace of bitterness in his laughter, as if he was bidding farewell to the suffering of the past. Andre smiled and nodded, and said meaningfully, "Yes, you have a name. From now on, you will no longer be that abandoned child who is bullied by others. You will master the power of arcane magic and become a high and mighty spellcaster in the eyes of ordinary people. Remember this moment well. It will leave a rich and colorful mark in your life. At the same time, don't forget your original goal. If there was any profession in this world that could be compared to a dragon that could become strong just by sleeping, then the warlock would definitely be at the top of the list. This profession did not need to study as hard as a mage to gain power through the understanding of objective things and the laws of the universe, nor did it need to undergo arduous training day after day like a warrior. They only needed to activate the mana in their bodies and find a way to release this mana. Then, they would naturally be able to release magic spells. Although the number of spells they could cast was far less than that of mages, the number and power of the spells they could cast were not inferior. It could be said that in all of Orire, there was no other profession that could gain power as easily as a warlock. Alfred, who had just received a name, did not understand the hint in Andre's words because he was hungry, very, very hungry. Otherwise, he wouldn't have risked being killed to sneak into the luxurious uptown mansion to steal. One had to know that although Valen City was called the City of Chaos, there were not many people who dared to steal from uptown. If he was caught, he would definitely suffer a fate worse than death. After thoroughly understanding that the other party would not harm him, the boy sat down on the ground generously, grabbed the food he had stolen from the kitchen, and stuffed it into his mouth. Seeing him wolf down the food, Andre took 2 steps forward and sat down on the ground without a care. He asked with interest, "Alfred, can you tell me about your parents?" "Parents?" The boy was slightly taken aback, and then sighed with a wry smile. I don't remember too clearly. Ever since I could remember, I've always been wandering the streets and begging, because inconceivable things would always happen around me. For example, some things would suddenly disappear, and some things would float up for no reason. Everyone said that it was the doing of the demon in my body. So, we can't rule out the possibility of a supernatural bloodline in your body. Andre murmured thoughtfully. Chapter 679. No, sir. Although I don't know who my parents are, I know where I was born. I was born in the slums of this city. This could be seen from the insults and bullying of the people around me. Therefore, my parents must be ordinary humans. They are either prostitutes or brothels or poor laborers. They definitely can't be the users of supernatural powers you speak of. Otherwise, I wouldn't have ended up like this. Alfred used emotionless words to describe his inference about his birth parents. There was no overflowing resentment or so-called anger. It was as if he was talking about 2 ordinary people without a trace of emotion. Suddenly, Andre noticed that the boy in front of him was in a very strange mood. There was an indescribable awkwardness, so he subconsciously asked, "Don't you hate your parents? After all, they abandoned you when you were young. You have enough reason to hate them." "Hate? No. I don't hate them at all." Alfred swallowed the food in his mouth and calmly shook his head. "All these years I've been wandering the streets, begging, stealing, enduring the scorn, ridicule, insults, and even beatings of countless people. Hate and anger can't solve any problems, and it can't let those who look down on me suffer any harm. On the contrary, it makes these people feel inexplicably excited. If you show a resentful gaze when they insult or beat you, then you will only get another beating in return. Ever since I understood this, if someone hit me, scolded me, or laughed at me, not only would I not resent them, I would even put on a smile from the bottom of my heart. This way, they would feel very bored, lose interest in continuing, and let me go. The essence of this world is the law of the jungle. I'm weak, so naturally, I will become a target to be bullied in the eyes of others. When I become strong, I can naturally bully those who are weaker than me." The boy's words shocked Andre. Incomparable shock. He almost couldn't believe that these words came from the mouth of a boy who wasn't even 10 years old. However, after giving it some thought, he felt that under the cruel living conditions, it wasn't strange for an immature child to have such thoughts. After all, most of the time, in order to live better, the brain would adapt to the surrounding environment and subtly change a person's form and consciousness. Some would even temporarily abandon their humanity and completely transform into a beast. Looking at the boy who was desperately stuffing food into his mouth, Andre had a complicated look in his eyes. After a full minute, he took a deep breath and said, "Alfred, you will definitely be a great person in the future. Not only did the suffering of your childhood not destroy your thin body, but it also trained you to have a strong will. This is a precious treasure that will benefit you for the rest of your life. Maybe, right now, I just want to be able to eat my fill. I don't want to risk my life for some food, and I don't want to die in some corner for no reason one day. Who knows what will happen in the future?" The boy shrugged nonchalantly. Some say that fate is like a mischievous fairy. You never know what mischief it has in store. To Alfred, fate was darkness, boundless and endless darkness from the time he could remember until now. It was full of suffering and pain. There was no light at all from the beginning to the end. The ugliest part of human nature was always following him like a shadow, leaving an indelible mark on his young heart. As a result, his way of looking at things was completely different from normal people. Andre didn't know what kept the boy alive until now. If it were him, he would have either exploded in silence or committed suicide in madness. Conversation and communication were always the best way to bridge the gap between people. After more than half an hour of chatting, the two people who didn't know each other gradually closed a gap between them. Although they couldn't be considered friends, at least they had established a preliminary trust. Especially the young Alfred, who had basically let down his guard and even took the initiative to talk about the misfortune he had encountered. As for Andre, he was a patient listener, expressing his own opinions from time to time. Time passed by like this, and before long, the boy who had eaten his fill began to yawn and quickly fell asleep on the ground. Gazing at little Alfred's peaceful face, Andre sighed slightly and muttered to himself, "Have a good dream, child. Believe me, your suffering will not be in vain. After a while, I will eradicate all evil and let the whole of Valen's city rise from the ashes, establishing true order and prosperity. I won't let similar situations happen again, at least not under my rule." With that, he stood up and returned to the table that had turned into a wooden horse, continuing to study the rank 4 spell, Transfiguration. It had to be said that Alfred's sleep was very sweet, and he even had a beautiful dream. In his dream, he was living in a luxurious room, surrounded by endless delicacies. 2 handsome traveling poets stood on either side of him, reciting his great achievements. Everything seemed so real that he was unwilling to wake up. But unfortunately, no matter how beautiful a dream was, there was still a time when he had to wake up. After an indeterminate amount of time, the boy slowly opened his eyes and suddenly found himself lying on a thick piece of fur. Not far in front of him was a large bowl of steaming meat soup. He sat up and rubbed his eyes, finally remembering where he was at the moment. He jumped up in fright and yelled, "Damn it, I actually fell asleep here?" He relaxed, little guy. If you're worried that the owner of this house will suddenly return, then I can tell you that it won't happen within a few days. Hurry and drink that bowl of meat while the soup is still hot. Follow me after you're done. Remember, no matter who you meet, don't speak, and you're not allowed to call out my name, understand? Andre had changed into a set of dark blue robes and black leather boots at some point in time. Even though he hadn't closed his eyes for the entire night, he was still full of energy. Understood. I'll listen to your arrangements. Hearing that the owner of the house wouldn't return, Alfred immediately let out a sigh of relief. He picked up the big bowl and began to drink in small sips. As a child who had endured starvation for a long time, what he feared the most wasn't being kicked or punched, nor was it death. Instead, it was starvation, especially the fiery, burning sensation of the stomach acid corroding his internal organs. He only needed to experience it once in his life to understand how terrifying it was. Chapter 680. The morning sun shone on the earth, bringing light and heat to all things in the world. At the same time, the turmoil and killing that had lasted for an entire night gradually calmed down. Apart from a large number of corpses on the streets, there were barely any pedestrians. The originally bustling and noisy city seemed to have become a dead city overnight. However, there were always some people in the world who were more daring, or rather, fearless. Not long after, 2 figures, one big and one small, suddenly appeared on the quiet streets of the upper city. The bigger one looked to be around 50, with high cheekbones, a high-nosed bridge, and sharp facial features. His eagle-like eyes gave off a cold and fierce feeling. If the members of the Shadow Web saw him, they would immediately call out his name, Uhtred. Of course, the real Uhtred had already died long ago, and the one in front of him was only Andre, who had used a transformation spell. The small figure following behind him was naturally Alfred, who had displayed a powerful talent as a warlock. Ever since he had seen the magical power of transformation magic with his own eyes, the boy had been sizing up Andre with a curious gaze along the way, as if trying to figure out how a person could become another person. Andre ignored the little fellow's curiosity and went straight to a high wall built with huge stones in the upper city. He stretched out his finger and lightly tapped on one of the stones with a snake-shaped imprint, then muttered in a low voice, "The Snake of Vengeance opens the path of the arcane spell." As soon as he finished speaking, the snake-shaped imprint on the stone suddenly released a golden radiance, then quickly caved in, causing the surrounding stones to spin rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it formed a tunnel that led underground. "Oh, my God, this is simply inconceivable." Alfred opened his mouth wide, an expression of disbelief appearing on his face. Inconceivable? The existence of the arcane spell itself is an inconceivable thing. There's nothing to make a fuss about. Remember, from now on, unless you have my permission, you're not allowed to make sound, and you're not allowed to speak. After saying that, Andre stepped into the tunnel. He could feel that this was not a tunnel, but a one-way teleportation portal. Because the mages of the Sardinia Islands were still very weak, they built their nest in a very secretive place to ensure their safety. Other than the internal members and a few servants, no one knew how to enter. In the eyes of many ordinary residents, they were even invisible and did not know that such an organization existed. As the two of them entered the tunnel, the rocks behind them quickly returned to their original positions, completely sealing off their path of retreat. The pitch-black environment made Alfred feel a trace of fear. He grabbed Andre's belt tightly, trying to find some psychological comfort. However, the darkness didn't last long. A few seconds later, a blinding light descended from the sky, causing him to feel dizzy. By the time he reacted, he found himself in a beautiful room. The surrounding walls were filled with complex magic patterns that flashed with a dazzling silver light from time to time. The huge crystal above his head emitted a soft glow that illuminated the entire room. Two huge stone puppets stood on both sides of the room. From their ruby eyes, it was easy to tell that they were not ordinary sculptures or decorations, but real killing machines. Just as the boy was in a daze, a pretty girl took 2 steps forward and bowed respectfully. "Welcome back, Master Uhtred." Andre, who had transformed into Uhtred, glanced at the apprentice badge on the girl's chest and pretended to be indifferent as he nodded his head. "MHM, did anything happen in the tower during the few days I was away?" "I'm very sorry, Master. I'm only an apprentice, so I'm not too sure about the whereabouts of the other masters. However, last night, the wizard tower detected a strong magic fluctuation in the city. Master Angus and Master Isidore went to deal with it and haven't returned yet. Earlier today, Master Gerald Jenkinson received a message from the Underground Guild and also left. The female apprentice appeared to be very careful. Even when answering questions, she tried not to be subjective for fear of accidentally getting involved in the fight between the masters. After sensing the other party's strong vigilance, Andre didn't continue to ask because he had a rough understanding of the internal situation of the Wizard Tower. He directly pointed at the boy behind him and ordered, "Take him to take a bath and change into an apprentice's robe. Then send him to my room." The female apprentice glanced at Alfred with pity and hurriedly bowed. "As you wish, Master." In her opinion, the boy in front of her was dead for sure. Moreover, he would die very miserably. There was no possibility of him surviving. All the apprentices in the secret wizard tower knew that Master Uhtred was an out-and-out cold-blooded demon. Once one became his experimental subject, the death rate was 100%. However, the girl didn't know that the real Uhtred had died long ago, and the one in front of her was a fake. Ignoring the thoughts of the female apprentice, Andre gave Alfred a reassuring look before turning around and walking inside. After hearing the news of Gerald Jenkinson's departure, he couldn't wait to ransack the place. To be more precise, he wanted to take over Uhtred and Isidore's inheritance. These two fellows were not low-ranked mages. In their rooms and laboratories, there must be many precious magical items, materials, potions, formulas, books, and so on. If he didn't properly ransack them, he would be letting himself down. When Angus betrayed, he had clearly explained that in the Valence City Mage organization, including himself, there were only 4 people who could be called masters. 2 of them were already dead. This also meant that after Gerald Jenkinson left, Andre, who was disguised as Uhtred, could do whatever he wanted. Apart from the central control room, there was no place he couldn't go. Under the gaze of many apprentices and low-ranked mages, Andre quickly passed through the corridor of the public area and arrived in front of a door with a skull engraved on it. Without hesitation, he took out Isidore's spellbook and slipped it into the groove in the middle of the door. In an instant, 2 rays of lethal red light shot out from the skull's eyes. Andre was obviously prepared for this. With a sidestep, he easily dodged the attack and wasn't hit. Without a doubt, this was a trap that Isidore had set up in front of his room. As the trap was triggered, the stone door began to slowly rise. Not long after, a large circular space was revealed. Chapter 681. Oh, damn it. It would be great if I could call a moving company right now. Looking at the dazzling array of materials in the room, the never-before-seen apparatuses and tools, as well as the hundreds of books related to magic, Andre could not help but want to transform into the most ferocious bandit and rob everything in the room, even though he had seen many big scenes. But unfortunately, Oreir did not have a moving company, nor did it have a telephone or communication satellite. It was impossible for him to move so many things by himself. This feeling was like a person standing in a warehouse full of gold, but helplessly realizing that he could not take much away. Pain, conflict. The saddest thing in life was this. Sigh, life is not as you wish. Follow the basic principle of robbery. Try to pick small, light, and valuable things to take. Andre muttered to himself softly and walked into the house, closing the stone door behind him. He began to act like a real bandit, quickly identifying the value of all the items. It had to be said that after becoming a mage, he had accumulated a huge amount of professional knowledge, allowing him to become one of the most professional robbers in the world in a very short period of time. In less than 10 minutes, he was able to pick out the items that he urgently needed from the thousands of strange and bizarre items. For example, there was a core of elemental energy. It could provide an endless supply of energy and was a necessary item to make golems or other puppets. Another example was a small bottle of viscous green liquid. It was the essence of the blood of a cave troll. Just a little bit of it would allow the cells to have a terrifying self-healing effect. Even if there was only a finger left, it could be restored to its original state by swallowing other creatures. The only drawback was that this thing would destroy one's rationality, and anyone who used it would become as stupid as a troll. There were many other similar precious materials. Under Andre's careful selection, the materials that Isidore had saved up over the past few decades quickly filled up a snakeskin bag that was 2 feet long and half a foot wide. Of course, this pocket was also a magic item found in the corner of the room. It seemed to have been enchanted with a level 3 magic shrinking spell, which could reduce the volume and weight of all objects that bumped into it to 1/16 of their original size. With this, the looting operation became much easier. Many of the larger experimental equipment were stuffed into it. After doing all this, Andre was slightly relieved. Taking advantage of the fact that no one was paying attention, he picked up the bag and quickly left the room. At the same time, he took out the magic book embedded in the door and turned to walk towards the room that belonged to Uhtred. Last night, he had already received a simple structural diagram of this secret mage tower from Angus, as well as various things to take note of. Therefore, he was not nervous at all. He skillfully removed the secret code hidden in the pattern on the door, and then quietly entered a room with a huge water tank. There was no doubt that this was Uhtred's lair. Unfinished research was placed everywhere, especially the black and red liquid in the water tank that emitted a foul stench. At first glance, it was obvious that it was related to demons. Even without using a detection spell, one could guess that this was where he summoned the succubus. Just when Andre was about to flip through the notes placed on the experiment bench, the door behind him was suddenly knocked, followed by the voice of the female apprentice not long ago. "Master Uhtred, I've already cleaned this boy according to your request." Andre hurriedly threw the snakeskin bag in his hand behind the nearest cabinet and deliberately put on a serious look as he replied, "The door is not locked. Come in. In that case, I won't be polite and disturb you." After saying that, the young female apprentice carefully pushed open the door, but she didn't have any intention of coming in. Instead, she lightly pushed the boy beside her. At this moment, Alfred had already changed into a white apprentice's robe, and on his feet was a pair of leather sandals unique to the southern region. His messy short black hair looked very spirited, and coupled with his delicate and pretty facial features, he was simply as beautiful as a girl. His every movement exuded a unique charm, completely different from his previous dirty image. The young female apprentice didn't even conceal the infatuation in her eyes, as if she wanted to swallow him whole. Extraordinary charm. As a knowledgeable mage, Andre almost immediately thought of this word. This was a kind of innate talent, and, just like the literal meaning, it would allow a person to have an indescribable affinity, making it easier to obtain the love and loyalty of others. It belonged to a natural leader, organizer, and coordinator. However, it wasn't too strange for a sorcerer to have extraordinary charm, because a sorcerer originally belonged to a profession with high charm. No matter what method he used to become a sorcerer, he would inevitably have a different temperament from ordinary people. Perhaps he might not necessarily be very beautiful, but you definitely wouldn't be able to ignore his existence. Even among thousands of people, he would be easily recognized. To put it simply, charm was almost equivalent to the power of existence. It covered a very wide range, from the influence on people and things around, to the affinity with magical elements, to whether it was easy to obtain the favor of gods or powerful creatures. Perhaps before awakening his talent as a sorcerer, the boy was still a little beggar who was ostracized by human society. However, after awakening his talent, his charm had greatly increased, and he was no longer a small person who could be easily ignored. Cough. If there's anything else, you can leave now. Noticing that the female apprentice's eyes were getting more and more heated, Andre frowned and deliberately coughed, rudely ordering her to leave. I'm very sorry." The female apprentice was frightened by the cold gaze and hurriedly bowed, hurriedly turned around, and disappeared at the end of the corridor. Although she was very unwilling to leave Alfred with a demon, she still didn't have the courage to disobey the orders of a master. After watching the female apprentice leave, Andre didn't say anything else and directly used the incantation recorded in Uhtred's spellbook to seal the whole room. Following that, he said to the bewildered boy, "I'm a little busy now. You go over there and sit for a while. Whether you sleep or sit and watch, in short, don't make a sound and don't casually walk around or touch anything. I ask you to maintain absolute silence, understand?" "Understood. Please don't worry. I won't cause any trouble." Alfred had a more mature mind than his peers, so he obediently nodded and agreed. In fact, as a sorcerer, he could sense that more than half of the objects in this room were emitting faint energy waves. Even if no one reminded him, he wouldn't easily touch them. Chapter 682. As a person who kept his promises, Andre would never forget that he had promised a succubus a few days ago to summon her back to the material world from the bottomless abyss. Now that he already had the necessary things to carry out the summoning ritual, he naturally wouldn't waste them, especially the binding magic circle that Uhtred had drawn. It could be said to be completely flawless, saving him at least a week of preparation time. Of course, the most important thing was that before meeting Gerald Jenkinson, he needed to make all the necessary preparations. A succubus who had a deep understanding of human desires could provide a lot of useful suggestions and could even act as a qualified helper in battle. Ever since the God of Gods used his supreme power to isolate powerful entities, including the gods, from entering the material world, interplanar teleportation and summoning have become very difficult. In the past, only level 5 magic was needed to open a portal to another world, but now it required level 7 magic at least. Normally, level 9 mages would be unable to complete such a summoning. However, with the help of the Wizard Tower, everything would instantly become a lot easier. At least in terms of energy supply, even the most crude Wizard Tower wouldn't be inferior to a legendary mage. Analysis. Arcane geometry construction is perfect. Analysis. Magic energy flow speed is normal. Analysis. Binding magic circle has no flaws. Analysis. Concentration of demon blood in the pool is low. Analysis. Space structure is stable. Andre's eyes were like electronic scanners. Wherever they passed, detailed information would be immediately reflected in his retina. Normal mages would need several days to complete the inspection work, but he only needed a few minutes to completely complete it. Of course, this was only a preliminary inspection. The next thing to do was to carry out the repair. It must be known that no matter what kind of magic ritual it was far more complicated than simple arcane magic, and at the same time, more dangerous. Andre didn't dare to be careless at all. He didn't want a little mistake to cause the summoning to fail or directly open a permanent passage to the abyss. After more than an hour of hard work, all the preparations needed for the ritual were ready. Andre almost didn't hesitate at all, immediately starting to chant the incantation according to the records in Uhtred's spell book, continuously pouring the energy of the Wizard Tower into the magic circle. Soon, the black-red liquid in the pool began to spin rapidly in the shape of a vortex, gradually forming a planar passageway about a meter in diameter. When the passage stabilized a little, he immediately closed his eyes and called out in a low voice, "Ulrika Claridge, Martha Levins, ruler of desire, in the name of the arcane mage, I command you to appear before me immediately." Just as he finished speaking, suddenly, a powerful and evil force emerged from the other side of the tunnel. In the blink of an eye, a succubus with a big belly suddenly appeared. As she ran for her life, she looked back as if she was being chased by something. After discovering the entrance, she flapped her wings and jumped up, passing through the passage and entering the material world again. "Quick, close the tunnel immediately." The succubus who had just fallen into the pool immediately shouted at Andre. However, her shout came a little too late. Before Andre could react, he saw a thick arm covered in red scales reaching through the plain passage and grabbing the poor succubus in the palm of its hand. It was followed by a burst of unbridled laughter. "Ha ha 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 ha! Ulrika Claridge, Martha Levins, you pitiful little worm, you actually want to escape from my control. Unforgivable. I will cut off your limbs, peel off the skin on your face, make a specimen out of the little brat in your belly. No, save me. I am willing to pay any price. Any price." Realizing that she had been caught, the succubus screamed in terror. She would rather die immediately than be brought back and be tortured day and night. "Hee hee, as you wish, beautiful lady." Andre calmly placed a hand on his chest, pretending to be a gentleman as he bowed slightly. He immediately cut off the energy supply to the Wizard Tower. In an instant, the planar passage that had lost its energy supply began to shrink rapidly. The vortex entrance was like a tightened noose, firmly holding the thick arm in place. It could neither come out nor retract. The owner of the arm had obviously noticed this as well. He gritted his teeth and roared loudly, "Bastard! Who is helping this damned little worm? Lowly mortal! I order you to open the planar passage immediately. Or else what? Idiot whose brain is stuffed with muscles." Before he could finish his words, he was interrupted by Andre's cold laughter. As if deliberately provoking the other party's anger, Andre mocked in a condescending tone, "The place I am in is the material world. With your level of strength, I'm afraid you won't be able to squeeze your way over in your lifetime. At best, you can only bark like a defeated dog. Do you think I care about a mad dog locked in a cage? Scram. Scram far, far away. I will take this arm as interest first. After saying that, he raised his hand and snapped his fingers. The whole binding array directly released a dazzling white light, firmly holding the arm in place. At the same time, the speed of the closing of the passage became faster and faster. The unbreakable space energy was like a chainsaw, quickly cutting the muscles on the arm. Black blood suddenly splashed in all directions. Wherever the blood came in contact with it, it immediately made a sizzling sound and even emitted white smoke. There was no doubt that this blood was very corrosive. It could be acid or alkali. In short, it was quite dangerous. The intense pain made the greater demon on the other side of the passage furious. He opened his mouth and cursed, threatened, and tempted. But unfortunately, Andre was not moved at all. He just watched as the entrance slowly closed and the entire arm was cut off bit by bit. He was not an idiot. He knew very well what kind of strength the owner of this arm had. Once the planar passage was opened, as the other party said, the first one to die would be him. Demons were not a race that liked to abide by oaths. Without the suppression of absolute power, it was not surprising that they would do anything crazy. Seeing that the big hand holding her shoulder was finally cut off and she fell into the pool with a plop, the succubus instantly heaved a sigh of relief. She seemed to have collapsed. She stroked her protruding belly and said in a weak and hurried voice, "Now is not the time to relax. Quickly release the magic binding. I'm about to give birth. I'm sorry, madam. Because of what you have done in the past, I will not let you out before you sign a magic contract." Chapter 683. Although the succubus's fetal membrane had already ruptured and a large amount of amniotic fluid was flowing out of her lower body, which was a sign that she was about to give birth, Andre was still expressionless as he handed over a magic contract that he had prepared in advance. He saw through this cunning creature's little trick to gain sympathy at a glance. Before the magic contract was signed, the succubus could not be released no matter what. Otherwise, the moment he released the contract, the succubus would disappear without a trace in the next second. "Damn it, you're such a heartless bastard." Knowing that it was impossible to deceive him, the succubus cursed in a low voice as she obediently bit her finger and used her blood to sign her name at the bottom right corner of the parchment. Due to the bursts of pain before giving birth, she did not even have the energy to read the terms carefully. As the saying went, since it was impossible to resist, she might as well lie down and enjoy it. Unsympathetic? No, madam. You seem to have forgotten who saved your little life from the hands of a great demon just now. Tell me, who is he? Why did he chase you? Seeing that the magic contract had taken effect, Andre was in a good mood. Not only did he immediately remove the restraints of the magic formation, but he also smiled and asked what had happened. "Sorry, I need to give birth now. I don't have time to answer your question." The succubus rolled her eyes in annoyance and jumped out of the pool directly. She lay on the bed that Uhtred used to sleep, spread her legs, and used all her strength to give birth. In just half a minute, the little succubus's head squeezed out of the mother's body, followed by her body, wings, tail, legs. The entire birth process was unusually smooth. With the guarantee of her strong physical fitness, she did not need anyone's help at all and directly gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Then, she used her sharp claws to tear off the umbilical cord and threw the little succubus, who had just been born, to Andre like she was throwing trash. "Catch! She belongs to you now. That damned little bastard almost got me killed." Andre had long expected this. He grabbed a white shirt from the chair and gently wrapped the chubby little guy up. At the same time, he waved at the stunned boy sitting at the side. "Alfred, take her to the pool over there to wash up." The boy hurriedly jumped up from the chair and ran forward. He carefully took the baby girl who had horns on her head and a tail behind her. Moreover, she had just been born and opened her eyes. His eyes were filled with curiosity. Demons were not humans. The cruel living environment of the abyss did not allow them to have a growth period of more than 10 years. Usually, a newborn demon would develop rapidly in a very short period of time. Within a few weeks, they would be able to get rid of their dependence on their parents, and within 1 to 2 months, they could hunt in the wild independently. Therefore, although the little succubus had only been born for less than 10 minutes, it was still very dangerous. The triangular bone at the end of her tail was both sharp and sturdy. Piercing a person's throat was not a problem at all. Noticing the boy's confused expression, Andre smiled and shook his head. Remember, she's a demon, so you have to be careful, especially not to let her feel danger or hostility. Otherwise, this little thing will tear your throat apart in a few seconds, understand? Understood. I'll be careful. Alfred shuddered subconsciously. He immediately adjusted the position of his hands to make the little succubus more comfortable. However, he was obviously overthinking. As a warlock with extraordinary charm, he was born to easily gain the affection of others. A little succubus who had not yet developed her mind could not resist this charm at all. Soon, she completely fell for it and cried out excitedly. After watching the boy put the baby girl into the pool and began to scrub, Andre turned his head and stared at the succubus lying on the bed with a meaningful look. After a full minute, he said, "Explain. I need you to give me an explanation. According to the terms of the contract, I have the right to know who the owner of that arm is and what happened. Also, should I continue to call you Carmen, or should I call you Ulrika Clary Martha Levens? Just call me Carmen. I like this name. As for the other name, I will only use it when facing my own kind." After the successful birth, the succubus immediately returned to her original charming appearance and answered evasively. She crossed her legs in an extremely seductive posture and did not mind showing her perfect lower body. There was a faint smile on the corner of her mouth. Her whole person was like a ball of fire, burning with the fire of desire. "Okay, Carmen, please don't try to escape. Answer my question directly. You should know best that those little tricks are useless against me." Andre narrowed his eyes and warned. Seeing that there was no way to fool him, the succubus pretended to be innocent and spread out her hands. "I'm doing this for your own good. You should know that some things are more dangerous the more you know. Many unlucky people were killed because they knew something they shouldn't know." Andre sneered and nodded. "What you said is very reasonable. However, I'm not afraid of danger, and I'm not afraid of challenges. The only thing I'm afraid of is being kept in the dark. Either answer my question immediately, or be prepared to accept the punishment of the contract. Tell me, what is your choice?" Okay, it's okay to say it. He was my previous master and also the father of that little guy. He was a powerful, fierce, cruel, and cunning Glabrizu. The reason he chased after me was very simple. During a battle for territory, I sold some information to his enemy. As a result, he was ambushed by the enemy. His army was completely wiped out, and he even lost his castle. Since then, this guy swore to make me pay. If you didn't summon me in time, I'm afraid I would have been cut into countless pieces. Carmen used a slightly mocking tone to tell the reason why she was chased. It could be seen that she did not regret betraying the other party at all. Instead, she was a little proud, as if betraying was a virtue and she should be praised. However, Andre felt that things were not that simple. He glanced at the broken arm floating on the pool from the corner of his eyes. From the thickness and the shape of the claws, it was indeed very similar to the Glabrizu. The only difference was the color of the scales. According to the records in the Book of the Devil, the scales on the surface of the Glabrizu should be dark brown and black, but this one was red. Of course, this was not absolute. After all, the bottomless abyss was known as the most chaotic and disorderly place in the universe. Demons were always changing their appearance and color. It was normal for a few mutants to appear. However, Andre always had a hunch that the succubus in front of him did not tell the whole story. There must be some secret or conspiracy behind it. Chapter 684. Getting to the bottom of things was never the first choice of a smart person, because if the other party didn't want to tell the truth, then they would only get more lies and deceit in the end, getting further and further away from the truth. Andre was no doubt a smart person, so he didn't ask more about the relevant content. Instead, He took the initiative to change the topic to other aspects, such as how to kill a 12th level defensive magician. Carmen, I'm in a bit of trouble now, and I need your help and advice. Hee hee, I can see that, or else you wouldn't have turned yourself into Uhtred's appearance. Tell me, who's the one that gave a handsome and wise magician such a headache? Saying this, the succubus got up from the bed and stretched out her arm to gently stroke Andre's cheek. Her seductive red lips curled up slightly, as if she was teasing and teasing him. Andre obviously wasn't in the mood to play this kind of ambiguous little game with her. He directly pushed away the palm on his face and frowned. Gerald Jenkinson, he's the trouble I'm in. I believe you should have heard of this name. Gerald Jenkinson? Wow, you're in a lot of trouble. Carmen pretended to exclaim exaggeratedly, and then laughed out loud. While laughing, she said playfully, I really didn't expect you to provoke this guy. Did you know? At that time, Uhtred specifically warned me to keep my distance from Gerald because he had a deep fear of Gerald in his heart. Most importantly, this guy is the controller of the Wizard Tower. He can mobilize a huge amount of energy to crush all enemies at any time. Thank you for your reminder, but I understand all of this, so I need your advice. If you want to be sarcastic or ridiculing, then please keep your mouth shut and speak after you have constructive opinion. Andre didn't like this kind of tone that was full of ridicule, so he didn't give her any face. The succubus shrugged her shoulders indifferently and continued to analyze. Obviously, we don't have any chance of winning at all in a head-on confrontation. Not to mention the great power of the Magician Tower. Just the 12th level defensive magician himself is quite difficult to deal with. The only chance of winning is to kill Gerald with lightning speed before he can react. Otherwise, he will immediately activate at least 5 defensive spells. I don't need you to tell me that. What I want is constructive advice. You are a succubus, a veteran who has been to countless planes. You must know how to kill a 12th tier defensive mage in the shortest time possible. Andre did not want to waste any more time. He immediately requested. He knew very well that there was no perfect life form in the world. Even gods had all kinds of flaws, let alone mortals. The only difference was that some people could recognize where their flaws were, while others could not. As a smart person, Andre was well aware that his weakness was his lack of experience, especially when facing those old fellows who had been immersed in the arcane arts for decades. The price he had to pay to obtain victory in a head-on confrontation was too great, and it was also too dangerous. The slightest carelessness could cost him his life. Therefore, finding the opponent's weakness and killing them in a single blow was the best choice. Of course, whether Gerald Jenkinson was an enemy or not would only be known after the discussion. However, before the meeting, he had to be prepared for the worst. Perhaps seeing Andre's eyes getting colder and colder, Carmen finally stopped talking nonsense and explained seriously. In order to kill a defensive magician, first of all, we have to break the trigger spell he has prepared for himself. In other words, we need an anti-magic weapon. Secondly, we have to make sure that after the weapon pierces into the target's body, the target will not be able to make any sound, make any movement, or even have any conscious reaction. In other words, the weapon must have the effect of instant death. This way, we can make sure that the target will not activate some life-saving magic items at the moment of death, or mobilize the power of the Magician Tower to launch a counterattack against us. Lastly, and most importantly, how do you want to deal with 2 giant golems that are 5 meters tall and weigh more than 2 tons? As far as I know, Gerald Jenkinson carries with him 2 clay dolls that are the size of a palm. Once attacked, these 2 little things will immediately expand a few hundred times and automatically attack all the enemies in front of them. Hearing this series of problems that needed to be solved, Andre couldn't help but rub his forehead. At the same time, his brain was operating at high speed, considering all kinds of possibilities. After a full minute, a chilling madness appeared on his face, and he said to himself, "Is this the power of an advanced magician? Killing him actually requires so much preparation. How interesting, let me give it a try." "Are you sure?" Carmen's eyes were full of doubt and vigilance. It wasn't the first time she saw a magician showing such an expression. and she knew how terrifying a magician would become after showing such an expression. Yes, I'm very sure. It's not difficult to make an anti-magic weapon. I just happen to have a mithril scimitar here. As long as it is melted and mixed with a small amount of magic repellent metal, it can be made into any anti-magic weapon. The death effect isn't difficult either. I have a piece of the purest negative energy left behind after the death of the Spirit King. Add it to the weapon through enchantment, and the weapon will immediately have the effect of instant death. As for the last two clay golems, it's even easier. A piece of elemental energy condensed core, a bottle of cave troll's blood essence, and a Galabrizu's arm. I think these three can be combined to create an unkillable, unbreakable flesh and blood puppet. Unless it's damaged by fire or strong acid, it won't have a problem killing everyone in a city. It's more than enough to block the clay golems. As Andre spoke, he placed the required materials one by one on the table. He didn't know when it started, but whenever he encountered danger or was extremely nervous, his brain would not feel fear like a normal person. Instead, there was an inexplicable excitement. It was as if there was a voice in his heart that kept urging him to move forward. Move forward. Move forward. No one or power in this world can stop you. Not even a god. Looking at the rare materials neatly arranged on the table, Carmen suddenly realized that Andre wasn't just saying. He really planned to kill the rank 12 defense magician, Gerald Jenkinson, in the other party's magician tower. That was a powerhouse that even Uhtred was incomparably afraid of. He was a monster that could suppress all the supernatural forces in Valen City in their embryonic stage with his own strength. Chapter 685. Damn it, you're crazy. Killing the master of a mage tower in the middle of a mage tower. I'm afraid the only thing crazier than this is killing a god. After discovering that Andre had begun to throw the mithril scimitar into the magic furnace, Carmen could not help but cover her face and scream. She had just escaped from the pursuit of her former master, but now she had to risk her life with her current master. If there was even the slightest mistake in the entire plan, she would definitely die. She did everything she could to stay in the material world, not to find excitement, but to enjoy life better and enjoy the pleasure of teasing mortals. However, Andre obviously did not think so. The reason he summoned the succubus back from the bottomless abyss was to have an experienced advisor and adjutant who could answer his questions and provide useful suggestions at any time. There was a fundamental difference between the two. Coupled with the selfish nature of demons, they were bound to have huge differences for a long time. Unless a balance could be found, similar situations would continue to occur in the future. However, Andre obviously did not have the time to find this balance. As more and more complaints and curses came out of the succubus' mouth, he threatened without turning his head, "What you're doing is not helpful to the plan at all. If I were you, I would shut up and help to minimize the mistakes instead of venting your dissatisfaction. Remember, according to the content of the contract, you must obey my orders unconditionally. If you forget this, then I don't mind reminding you in a slightly violent way. Since this is the first time, I'll give you a verbal warning. It won't be so simple next time." After saying that, Andre carefully adjusted the temperature of the magic flame to the limit of the forceps pot. He then stared at the weapon turning red, soft, and slowly melted into a golden metal solution. The advantage of the fire elemental lineage was once again vividly displayed at this moment. After all, mithril was not ordinary steel. It required an extremely high melting point, almost as high as the graphite forceps pot. Without the dwarven alchemy solution, it was basically a pipe dream to melt a piece of mithril. If the temperature was slightly higher, it would cause the pincers to shatter. If the temperature was slightly lower, the mithril would not be able to melt into a liquid state. Apart from the fire element, which was the most sensitive to temperature, no other life form could achieve this. Feeling Andre's unshakable determination, Carmen suppressed the anger in his heart. He grabbed a small piece of light yellow, or on the table, and threw into the pincer. He then used a dagger to cut open his wrist and let his acidic blood fuse with the mithril. In an instant, the melted mithril gave off a pungent smell, accompanied by thick black smoke. In just a few seconds, the originally dazzling golden liquid was covered with a layer of visible magical energy, slowly turning into a grayish silver-white color. It looked so evil that even the high-temperature flames could not purify it. After doing all this, the succubus took a deep breath. She stared with her two red eyes and said, "Mithril, magic-repelling metal, ore, and demon's blood. When these three things are combined, it is enough to create a weapon that can pierce through magical defenses below grade 5. Remember, no matter what you plan to create, you must follow one principle: small, sharp, and easy to hide. Otherwise, once Gerald finds out, we won't even have a chance to make a move." "Why? Are you planning to assassinate Gerald yourself?" Andre asked expressionlessly while fiddling with the metallic liquid that was emitting a gray light. In fact, he had not yet thought about what kind of anti-magic weapon to create. A short sword? A dagger? A dart? An arrow? Anyway, in terms of length, it must not be more than 1.5 feet, and the width must be at most 2 fingers. Moreover, it must be formed in one go. Otherwise, it would be too late to modify it after the mithril was transformed into a solid state. As one of the hardest metals in the world, mithril was much harder and more resistant to wear than stainless steel. Therefore, it must be carefully considered before making a move. "If not me, then you?" Carmen curled her lips in disdain, showing undisguised contempt in her eyes. Of course, as a succubus, she was qualified to despise the close combat ability of a sorcerer, even if this sorcerer was also a level 1 rogue swordsman. "If so, then tell me what weapon you're best at. In 5 minutes, the metallic liquid in the pincer will be perfect. I need a template." Andre was not angry because of Carmen's mockery, because he knew it was the truth. His sword skills might be able to bully low-level close combat professions, but they were nothing in front of a real master. Carmen glanced at the amount of liquid and thought for a few seconds. Then she immediately replied, "Spear. According to the principle of arcane geometry, its shape is the easiest way to destroy the stability of the defensive spell model. So I need a spear. Considering the material, you only need to make the tip of the spear." Hearing the request of the succubus, Andre's face flashed with a trace of surprise. Then he nodded slightly. "No problem. I promise to make you a unique spear." Aurère's spear was not a traditional long spear. It was a conical weapon that completely gave up on cutting damage and pursued the ultimate penetration. Usually, it was a weapon specially equipped for feudal knights. The tip of the spear was made of sharp metal, and the body of the spear was made of fragile applewood. With the huge force brought by the charge of a warhorse, even a giant dragon would have its vital organs pierced by the tip of the spear. Ordinary soldiers would be killed in one strike. There was absolutely no need for a second strike. As for the applewood, it ensured that the wrist would not be damaged during the process of transferring the force. When the spear tip collided with the body's reaction force, the fragile wood would immediately break. It played a perfect role in dissipating the force. After all, the joints were one of the most fragile parts of the human body. Even with the strong body of a knight, they would not be able to withstand such a huge impact. Only those legendary close combat professions who had broken through the limit of their physical fitness could use a spear made of pure metal to launch a charge without damaging their wrist. The scene of using a metal spear to kill the enemy in the movies would never appear in reality. Because the moment of impact was enough to break the hardest bone in the human body into 2 pieces, not to mention how to pull the spear out of the enemy's flesh. The spear was a one-time consumable used to tear the enemy's dense formation. It was the first time Andre heard that a spear could be used as a weapon to assassinate a mage. Chapter 686. Although he didn't quite understand why the succubus would choose such an earth-shattering weapon, Andre still used a magic trick to make a mold for the spear. When the solution reached the perfect state, he poured the metal solution in the pot into it. Chi! accompanied by an ear-piercing sound. Large amounts of black smoke kept coming out. In just a few seconds, a weak anti-magic field was formed in the air. Feeling the faint repulsion around his body, Andre knew that the magic-piercing spear had been successfully forged. The next step was to wait for the mithril mixed with the demon's blood to cool down before carrying out the last step of enchantment. Of course, time was precious, and he naturally wouldn't just sit there and wait. Instead, he got up and took the thick demon's arm out of the pool, threw it on the empty test bench next to him, and carefully injected the troll's blood into it. When Carmen saw this, she immediately retreated to a corner and shouted in horror, "Bastard! King Lunatic! How dare you inject the troll's regenerative ability into Afram's arm without any protection? Do you know how dangerous this is?" However, she did have a reason to be afraid because the troll's regenerative ability was well known throughout Orire. The number of species that could compete with them in this aspect could be counted on one hand. According to the records and books, if you cut a troll in half, the cells hidden in the troll's body would quickly adjust and turn into 2 small trolls in a very short time. If you cut it into 3, it would be 3. There were also rumors that an adventurer had accidentally eaten a piece of cooked troll meat, and a few hours later, that piece of meat turned into a small troll and ate him alive from the inside. The troll's regenerative ability was so terrifying that if it weren't for the 2 weaknesses of fire and strong acid, the entire world would have been taken over by them. Since the troll had such a terrifying regenerative ability, what would happen if a certain part of another creature's body was injected with troll blood? The answer was simple. The cells in this part of the limb would be infected and mutated, eventually forming a miniature version without any intelligence. This clone could also restore its original size and appearance through eating. If Carmen wasn't lying, this arm would soon turn into a giant Glabrizu that was 5 to 6 meters tall and weighed over 2.5 tons. Staring at his rapidly changing arm, Andre shook his head with a smile. For a Glabrizu demon, this name was full of literary flavor. Don't worry, it's just a shell without a soul. It won't pose any threat. I even suspect that it won't retain its basic biological instincts after recovering its physical body. Idiot! Fram was not an ordinary Glabrizu. He was a secondary feudal lord of the 23rd layer of the Abyss. If he detected that his clone had appeared in the material plane, then his terrifying will would immediately descend upon this physical body. You, me, the entire island will be finished. Carmen, who was dominated by fear, finally couldn't help but reveal the secret hidden in his heart. There was no doubt that she was truly afraid this time. No one could remain calm after hearing the name of a secondary demon overlord, and few could stop such a powerful existence, even if it was only a projection of consciousness. Really? You're finally telling the truth. Remember, you owe me an explanation. Andre didn't show the slightest surprise. His eyes flashed with playfulness, and he quickly raised his arms. Borrowing the power of the wizard tower, he quickly cast a shielding spell, enveloping the entire room and completely isolating it from the outside world. After doing all this, the thick arm suddenly let out a hair-raising sound. The arm that was originally 2 meters long and half a meter wide slowly turned into a monster with violet eyes, long horns on its head, and thick hooves on its lower limbs. It had 2 different pairs of arms. The outer 2 were very thick, and the 3 sharp claws at the end were like crab pincers. The surface of its skin was covered with thick scales that could easily crush a human's head. Near the red muscles on its chest, there was a pair of relatively thin arms, but they weren't covered by scales. In addition, the sharp fangs in its mouth were more terrifying than any known beast, as if it could bite an adult elephant to death in one bite. Obviously, this was the typical image of a Glabrizu, especially the strong, chaotic aura emitting from its body. It made people a little breathless. Looking at this mini Glabrizu that was less than a quarter of its normal size, Carmen's spirit almost collapsed. She curled up into a ball and hid in the corner, shivering. She didn't even dare to raise her head. Alfred, who was bathing the little succubus, directly went under the bed with the baby girl in an attempt to avoid the monster that suddenly appeared in front of him. In the huge room, only Andre stood motionless. It wasn't because he was brave, but he didn't find any focus in the pair of violet eyes. In other words, although this body had recovered, there was no consciousness or soul inside. In order to confirm his judgment, Andre took out the dagger that he always carried with him, took 2 steps forward, and carefully cut a deep wound in the fragile mouth of the Glabrezu. Black blood suddenly flowed out of the wound, but it seemed to have lost its corrosiveness due to the infection of the troll's blood, and it automatically healed in a few seconds as if it had never appeared. Seeing that the demon didn't make any movements to resist, a faint smile immediately appeared on his face. At the same time, he used his fingers to touch the scales that were comparable to a full body armor and muttered to himself, "Great! What a perfect flesh and blood puppet. The next thing to do is to feed it with a large amount of meat until it's normal size, then open a hole in its chest and replace the heart with the elemental energy core. Of course, in the end, I still need to grab a fire elemental soul and stuff it in so that the connection with the body will be completely cut off." Needless to say, Andre's idea was very crazy. His method of making was completely different from the traditional flesh puppet on Oreir. Although the troll's blood made the puppet vulnerable to fire and acid, it gave his big guy an unimaginable regeneration ability. In addition to the Glabrezu's terrifying body size and lethality, even if it didn't have a soul and couldn't use any spells, it was enough to destroy an unknowing army. Chapter 687. A scholar once said that those who could create miracles were always the craziest people. Only by releasing all the mental restraints could one do what others couldn't. The so-called creation was to think of what others didn't dare to think of and try what others didn't dare to try. That was all. Perhaps Andre wasn't particularly crazy for the time being, but he had a vision that was different from this world. He could think, observe, and practice from a different perspective. Don't underestimate this. Many powerful legendary mages, in order to find a new point of focus, constantly explored the endless universe and planes, trying to jump out of the fixed mindset. To some extent, this was Andre's biggest cheat. It was far more groundbreaking than the eyes that allowed him to instantly obtain skills from books and improve his profession level through killing and completing missions. After all, even without the help of the latter, he could still become an outstanding mage through continuous learning, and one day he would definitely be able to cross the threshold of the legendary realm. But if he lost the former, he would only be one of the millions of mages in this world, and he would never be able to touch the threshold of the legendary realm. Andre, who was making magic puppets for the first time, quickly fell into an unprecedented state of concentration. He didn't pay attention to the reactions of the other people in the room at all, and directly used the magic communication device to ask the apprentice outside to send in 5 pigs and a cow. Due to the fact that the mages would often conduct experiments on living creatures, there was a huge livestock fence at the bottom of the hidden mage tower. Not only were there all kinds of animals, but there were also many intelligent life forms, including humans themselves. Therefore, this requirement could be easily satisfied. But in order to avoid nightmares at night, the apprentice in charge of sending things didn't even have the courage to look inside the door. After sending things to the door, he hurriedly fled back to his job. There was no doubt that he made the right choice. These pigs and cows were just driven into the room and were brutally slaughtered. Their bodies were cut into countless small pieces and directly forced into the mouth of the Glabrezu. Although it didn't have any intelligence, the normal digestive system still digested the flesh and blood cleanly. Even the bones were decomposed by the terrible stomach acid and became nutrients to strengthen itself. After all the flesh and blood had entered its stomach, the Glabrezu, which was only a quarter of its original size, finally returned to a huge monster with a height of 6 meters and a weight of more than 3 tons. Fortunately, Uhtred's room was quite spacious, or else it wouldn't be able to accommodate it. Looking up at the ferocious monster in front of him, Andre's lips curled up slightly, revealing a chilling smile. Hee, that's right, this is the size I want. Big enough, thick enough, ugly enough. Even if it's chopped into meat, it can still recover. Next, I'll install an inexhaustible core, and then inject a violent soul. And I believe that everyone who sees you will have a deep impression. Damn it, damn it, damn it. Lunatic, you're a lunatic through and through. I really regret signing a magic contract with you. Sooner or later, you'll get us all killed. The huge flesh and blood puppet seemed to have evoked the fear hidden in the depths of Carmen's memories. She didn't stop cursing, as if she wanted to vent all the remaining emotions in her heart. Regarding this kind of verbal offense, Andre never really cared, and he even spread out his hand with a smile. No, my dear lady, you shouldn't complain, but should instead thank me. Think about it. A huge flesh and blood puppet with the appearance of a Glabrizu. How much of a shock would it bring to the enemy? A lot of times, as long as we take it out and show it, we can make many potential enemies tremble in fear and thus eliminate any possible conflicts in the bud. You know, when I was very young, I really liked huge, brutal, and ugly monsters. I always dreamed of being able to control such a monster to destroy a village, a city, or even a country. Usually, childhood fantasies would disappear with age, but I was an exception. Not only did my fantasies not weaken, but they became even stronger. In my subconscious, there's a desire to destroy, a desire to kill, but this kind of impulse is suppressed by reason most of the time, so it doesn't show. Human nature is always complicated and contradictory. There are good parts and also evil parts. It's like the two sides of a coin. Even if there's only one side at a time, it's perfectly combined. Calm, and wise are the states I usually show the most, but that doesn't mean they're all of my personality. In my heart, there's never a lack of passion and madness, so you better get used to it as soon as possible. Otherwise, if you accidentally anger me one day, and I happen to not be able to maintain my rational state, then your situation will become very bad. Are you threatening me? Carmen stopped cursing at some point and asked carefully with her eyes wide open. As a succubus born from the desires of mortals, she could feel the intense conflict and struggle in the young mage's emotions. Threatening. Andre shook his head lightly. No, I think it's more appropriate for you to understand it as advice. After saying that, he no longer cared about Carmen, who was in deep thought. He smashed the mold, picked up the cold spear, and used all his strength to pierce the flesh puppet's chest. Then, with lightning speed, he stuffed the elemental energy core that was the size of an adult's fist into the broken heart. After doing all this, he didn't bother to clean up the blood on his body. He directly used the power of the Mage Tower to locate the fire elemental plane. Then, with the fastest speed, he summoned a large burning fire elemental. Andre didn't even wait for the fire elemental to figure out where it was summoned. He directly used the power given by the fire elemental prince to tear its body apart, extract its soul, and stuffed it into the body of the Glabrizu. Through the fusion of elemental energy into the core, the soul of the fire elemental quickly took control of its new body. After a few seconds of adapting, it immediately began to wave its thick and strong arms, smashing all the bottles and jars beside the experiment table into pieces. Stop! I order you to stop immediately. Andre, who was almost hit, immediately gave his first order. The flesh puppet with the soul of the fire elemental obviously couldn't resist the control of the Flaming Duke. It instantly stopped all its movements, and, at the same time, it spat out a sentence in the common language. Yes, my master. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.